Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Onepeg, and there are some new court documents for this. Now, this is going to be a rather long video. So what I'm going to do is at the start of this, I want to give you guys a TLDR for everybody that kind of wants to know the ins and outs. And for the rest of you that actually want to watch through the entire video, that would be amazing. But I realize it's a long one, okay? It's a couple of hours. So real quick TLDR for you all. The idea behind the case is Nexon suing ironmace, obviously. ironmace has filed to have the case dismissed, citing grounds of what they call forum non-convenience, meaning that this exact case being litigated already in Korea, in another court in Korea, is a much more preferential place to have this case heard, and the United States could deal with this case after that verdict comes out in Korean court. It didn't make any sense to litigate them both at the same time. And there are a bunch of supporting pieces of information, and you can go and check out that VOD if you want to. There's an awful lot of stuff there. This case is, or these documents are ironmace having been responded to for that. Nexon filed an opposition in court stating that it should remain in United States court for a few different reasons. Now, there are a couple of reasons in here that I think actually have some real merit. There's also a couple of like yuck moments in here too, but I'll probably save that for you all to watch in the VOD if you want to see them. In this case, they do have a few solid arguments, and there are some new pieces of information that we did not know. The first is that Nexon uncovered that a couple of people after Terry and Choi ended up leaving the company, after they left Nexon, there were a whole bunch of people that decided to quit and go along with them. Nexon found that 2 other employees have also accessed and taken information with them that they weren't supposed to take. One of them took a list of all of the assets that were bought from the Unreal Marketplace store. We obviously don't know what they did with them, but it looks awful sus because they took that stuff and then they quit the very next day. There was also a declaration that was made by James Blackburn, who is kind of like the lead attorney in the case of this case that works for Arnold and Porter. And obviously all of this will be up on the Patreon, but one of the interesting pieces that he showed was attached here to our exhibits I and J are true and correct, and they cited a Twitter account with 35,000 followers. That Twitter account is a super interesting one, because if we go to Exhibit J, they cite the Dark and Darker EN Twitter account. That Twitter account is listed as fan-made. It's a fan-made account. This is not the official account for Dark and Darker or ironmace Games. The official Twitter account for ironmace Games is at ironmace Games, who follows 43 people. I happen to be one of them. Just saying. Love you guys. Thank you for following me on Twitter. And boasts a following of almost twice as many people. Their last post was on May 18th. So that was a super interesting piece that we found that was kind of silly, kind of funny. The stuff in the case that have merit, though, the things that actually do hold water, are a couple of fold. The first is that they cite DMCA law. The DMCA legal process is one in which Party A says Party B stole information, and it's under copyright claim. Party B has the ability to respond to that claim and say, well, no, it's not. It should be reinstated. That's the dispute. However, when they do that, they concede that the jurisdiction, they recognize the jurisdiction of the local court in that area for the company that is hosting that information. So in this case, it is Valve and Steam located in or outside of Seattle, Washington in the Ninth Circuit Court. The company, ironmace, recognized in disputing that the jurisdiction of that court was valid. The argument that Nexon is making is that through having done that process, that the court then should have the ability to try the case. The argument here, though, that it will likely be made by ironmace is that these are kind of adhesive deals, meaning that in order for someone to argue against DMCA, they have to give up that concession if they're a foreign entity. They have no choice. Nexon pushed the hand of ironmace, who in turn pushed the hand of Nexon back and made Nexon file the case that they did. Otherwise, other third parties would have been liable, and Nexon would either have lost their ability to have the case tried altogether, and ironmace would have its gain back on Steam, or ironmace would have never had Dark and Darker see the light of day ever. The other important point that was made by Nexon in this case is that the Korean court is inadequate. See, the dismissal request said that Korean court should be the one to handle this. They have all of these different robust and nearly mimicking IP laws and penalties and whatnot to that of the United States court, and that it would be adequate enough to handle this case and how it would work. However, during the pretrial process in civil court, Nexon alleges, and it's believed to be true, that the court cannot compel. It can't make anyone give up any information it doesn't want to. So while the court says you should be giving us this information, including the source code, by the way, from both companies, neither company has given source code to the court to be reviewed. Through all 5,000 plus or 10,000 whatever pages of information that have been shared by both parties, none of that includes source code or any actual game files. And while Nexon and ironmace tried to come to an agreement on several different occasions throughout May and early June, neither one of the parties was able to agree to a setup where they would be sharing files with each other. ironmace has always alleged that it wants an independent third party to review the files and not Nexon. It didn't want to hand any information to Nexon and didn't care if Nexon was handing information to them. So far, no independent party has agreed, or they have agreed to having an independent third party review this information, but it could end up sticking in U.S. court anyway, potentially, because the judge could order both parties to give up the goose and have an independent third party review this information. ironmace, I believe, is trying to have this tossed because they likely don't have the ability to afford a very long, drawn-out court case. Most likely not in both places at the same time. However, Nexon is trying to also argue that they've seen no financial proof to say that ironmace couldn't afford this, even though Nexon themselves have filed and been awarded injunctions against personal property of Mr. Choi, which include his house, his vehicles, and his personal bank accounts. Even though the cause of financial duress of one of the parties that they've named in this suit, but here we are. Anyway, guys, that's kind of everything for the TLDR side of this. I know that this was still kind of long for a TLDR, but there's a 2-hour plus video of discussion that goes into all of the nuance and whatnot. So if you guys want to see that, take a look. The Blackburn part about the Twitter account is not in the VOD. That was found like afterward. But I hope you guys enjoy it. And I will see you tomorrow morning on twitch.tv/Onepeg, where I will be live somewhere around 7 to 8 a.m. Okay? Thanks so much. Peace.
We'll turn this on. A little lo-fi, you know? Chill the mood out. You know what I mean? Yeah. 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 Is there a playlist? Yes. Exclamation point playlist. There you go. Looks like Skillet handled it for you. Skillet's on the ball.
Okay, so
there were like a couple hundred pages of documentation. I want to say we got lots of PDFs. So this is the counter. This is the opposition that they filed right here, and then there's like tons of declarations and supporting exhibits for the declarations. We got quite a bit of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of shit in here. So they have declarations from James Blackburn, like basically the originating filing attorney in the United States that filed the DMCA claim. They've got Yi Quan Huang, who is the deputy manager. He's the guy that was the person in charge of SDF and that whole team when SDF was making the request to be able to work from home during COVID. He's the guy that was giving them the okay or the not okay. This guy from Mingjung Park is in a 23-year-long attorney that served as a judge for a while. He's been a guest professor at Duke University, really well practiced in law in Korea, and is acting as a consultant for the plaintiff for Nexon and their legal team in Korea and as it pertains to the United States. And then this guy Kwang Hyun Suk, what did he do? This guy, same deal. He's like a legal, like law professor regarding all things Korean law when it comes to IP stuff, acting as a consultant for the plaintiff. And then this guy Jason Park, who I don't think I saw a lot of when I was like browsing this. Oh, he's looking over. He's an expert in linguistics regarding there's a piece in here in their opposition of dismissal, or their opposition of the dismissal request. There's a piece in here that talks about like language verbiage on possible translations of a specific piece of language in the dismissal request. That he's either going that basically they're arguing that the language could be interpreted a bunch of different ways. But yeah, we'll I guess get to that. Okay, so in here in the opposition of dismissal, so just so that everybody's up to speed for the purpose of YouTube and stuff. Nexon is suing ironmace in Korea and in the United States. In Korea, it is a counterclaim to a lawsuit that ironmace filed after Nexon filed suit in the U.S. So Nexon filed suit in the U.S. under DMCA, saying that ironmace's game Dark and Darker was in violation of DMCA because the people that created Dark and Darker used to work for ironmace on a project called Project P3 that was completely unreleased, that they say was stolen from them, and then ironmace and Dark and Darker were created based on that stolen stuff. Obviously, ironmace denies all of that, and that's why we're in court. Once the DMCA notification was filed, the game had to be taken down because Valve found merit in it. They took the game down. ironmace filed a putback request to see if the game could get relisted. And then that forced Nexon to have to file a DMCA copyright infringement case in court in Seattle, Washington, which is where Valve is headquartered. So now this is all going through the Western District Court, the Ninth Circuit Court in the United States. At the same time, there's a court case going on in Korea where ironmace filed a suit trying to block Nexon from filing another DMCA claim in Korea, in their version of the DMCA, so that it would be relisted on Steam potentially, which Nexon then obviously fought, is still fighting, and then filed a counterclaim. Now, all of this stuff is all in like what they call pre-trial. So there's no panel of judges, there's no jury selected yet. We haven't even gotten to the point where all of the evidence is being like quote unquote discovered and like put together. That's in Korea too. They do have supporting evidence for their pre-trial hearing going on in Korea right now, where it's on recess. And by the end of this month in Korea, they're supposed to be looking over all of that right now. And then at the end of the month, there's supposed to be some type of a decision made preliminarily to see if there's an injunction against ironmace or not. That's kind of or against Nexon. So that's kind of what's in question right now. However, there are pieces of information about the Korean court system and how the Korean court system works that Nexon is trying to claim, that their attorneys are claiming, where they're arguing that they believe that the case would be better served in the United States under the DMCA claim and why it shouldn't be dismissed. And that's where we're at right now. ironmace filed a claim in court saying that all of this stuff should be pushed to Korea because the Korean court case is further ahead than the United States one, and Korea being like home turf for both of the companies is a better like venue for this to be heard than in the US, and doing them at the same time doesn't make any sense. Nexon disagrees with that, and they have their supporting declarations, which is all of this stuff up top here, these other tabs, and all of their background and why is in this document. And some of it is fucking wild, dude. Like, I was looking through a lot of this. Like, I was reading this for a couple of hours last night. Some of this is absolutely nuts. What they claim and how they have things laid out sheds some light on things that we've had questions about. Assuming that it's to, like, of course, there's going to be bias in here, and I've found some things in here that I was like, that's weak. But there's other pieces in here where it's like, oh, I didn't know that. So it's possible. Like, up until I started reading this, I was like, there's no way that this thing won't get tossed. And in reading this, it's like, it might, you know, a little, So we'll go through it. Okay, so we have all of we have their table of contents, and then we have the table of authorities. This is all of the cited documentation, all of the court cases that they are saying have precedent, and the pages that they're located on, right? And then obviously the statutes, the existing law that they are citing in each place where they cite it. Okay, so intro. In the first paragraph, from what I can tell, is accurate. So, beginning August 2022, defendants ironmace, Joo-Hoon Choi, and Terrence Park conducted a series of playtests in the United States of an English-language video game entitled Dark and Darker. Defendants placed the game on Steam, an online platform operated by Washington-based Valve Corporation, relied on the servers of Amazon Web Services to host online gameplay, and intentionally targeted the United States market, including by heavily promoting the game in English on the United States-based internet platforms Discord, Twitter, and YouTube. Defendants' targeting of the United States was successful, with a substantial percentage of Dark and Darker's players being located in the United States. Korean gamers, on the other hand, could not play the game during the defendants' fifth and last playtest of Dark and Darker because defendants geo-blocked them. Now, what they didn't... Now, this is true. But, okay, so a lot of times when... And again, I'm in reading this... They're going to make it sound as like damning as they possibly can, right? So what they're going with here is to say that they're in the last playtest, Dark and Darker blocked the Korean country from being able to play the final playtest. And I believe the reason why is because Korea doesn't allow like games distributed through like a torrent client. They've outlawed that. So they have to block them in order to prevent them from being in violation of the law. Because it was removed from Steam. Defendants' activities violate Nexon's United States copyright and trade secrets rights in a video game project entitled P3. Defendants do not contest that Nexon states federal claims against them that fall squarely within this court's jurisdiction, having failed to seek dismissal for failure to state a claim or for lack of subject matter or personal jurisdiction. Defendants nevertheless contend that the court should dismiss this action on forum nonconvenience grounds and require Nexon to bring its federal copyright and trade secrets claims in Korea. The defendants are incorrect. As the Ninth Circuit recently held, copyright cases concerning alleged unlawful activities purposefully directed toward the United States are more amenable to suit in the United States than the defendant's home territory. Having targeted the United States with their unlawful activities, alleged, defendants must now defend their actions in the United States court. Now, they're going to say, like, all of this is unlawful. They've been unlawful. They've done this on purpose. They targeted this, blah, blah, blah. Right? They're, like I said, inflammatory language, it's always going to have a little bit of bias in it. There's not a whole lot that won't sound like it's biased in here, but that's how it works, right? A forum nonconvenience dismissal is sought by the defendants as an exceptional tool to be employed sparingly, in which a defendant must make a clear showing of facts which establish such oppression and vexation of a defendant as to be out of proportion to the plaintiff's convenience, which may be shown to be slight or non-existent. While the standard should not be misunderstood as one that compels plaintiffs to choose the optimal form for their claim, the United States is the optimal form for Nexon's United States claims, not an oppressive or vexatious one. So, okay, so what they are doing in this is setting this up in a way where they're saying that so Nexon filed a DMCA claim, right? And then there's a process that has to get followed where you have two choices. If you're the person that had the claim made against you, you can let it lie, in which case the DMCA sticks. You never invoke a counter. You never say, hold on, right? And the DMCA sticks and your shit just never goes back up on the marketplace ever. Or you respond. In responding, you make a statement that says that you recognize the authority of the circuit court or of the court in that area, right? Like where the claim was made. Let's say in the case of Valve, you make a statement that says that you recognize the validity of the court and its law in disputing it, right? So what they're going to lean on in here is by saying that statement, you're acknowledging that the forum to have the case heard, if it went to trial or if it went to court, because the next step is Nexon had to file a lawsuit, right? Otherwise the game got relisted. The response here would be, since you made that statement saying that the court was valid, you're basically okaying the forum, even though your hands are kind of tied, right? Yuki, I'm great, man. How are you? A forum nonconvenience dismissal is sought by the defendants as an exceptional tool to be employed sparingly. Okay. So, then they're also saying that the reasons why the dismissal request was made wasn't good enough, right? And then they're going to support all of that. Korea is not an adequate forum. Where a plaintiff's right to obtain relief in a forum is a mirage in light of the foreign court's procedural rules, the foreign court is inadequate. So what they're trying to say is that on the surface, the Korean court might look like that it's as good, legally speaking, as the United States court. But there are reasons that they're going to list that show that the Korean court isn't as good as United States court, and why. The defendant's central defense is that they independently created rather than copied Dark and Darker, but Korean courts are powerless to compel production of the source code that runs Dark and Darker, and defendants have refused to produce it in Korea, leaving Nexon with only a mirage of a remedy on important parts of its claims in Korea. So this is huge, because if that is true, that is a massive, massive, massive boon for the plaintiff, for Nexon in this case, to make it be heard in the US. That helps them huge, huge, huge. Nor have defendants submitted any evidence that the forum identified in the forum selection clauses upon which they rely, Seoul Central District Court, is available. Rather, defendants have represented to this court only that they are amenable to service of process in Suwon, not Seoul, and in the Korean litigation, defendants have stated that Seoul court lacks jurisdiction over the merits. So, in Korea, they're hearing this in Suwon court, which Suwon is like an hour by public transit south of Seoul, of the district court in Seoul. So depending on where they live, because ironmace is in Suwon, depending on where everybody lives, it could be like a 2-hour trip to get into Seoul with the public transit system, because you can't get, like, if you live in Suwon, you can't get to Seoul via car. It doesn't really work. You have to, like, take the train, or you walk or ride a bike or something. Furthermore, the private and public interest factors favor the United States over Korea. With respect to the private interest factors, this court has the full power of the federal rules to permit Nexon and defendants to gain access to proof of the other's files and witnesses, while Korea has no pretrial discovery process. Moreover, the third parties with information relevant to the case are located in the United States, making this court a superior forum to a Korean court. While defendants claim inconvenience in that some evidence is in Korean, this factor is at best neutral because the parties' video games as presented to players and their underlying coding is in English. No matter where this dispute is litigated, the court will need to assess evidence in a foreign language. So, what they're saying is that all of the evidence that they would be able to pull from places like Amazon Web Services and places like Valve would all be in English natively, which would then have to be translated into Korean. Sorry. Which is true. And there's potential other like third-party testimony, like if they wanted to pull statements that got made, like in interviews that they did on YouTube, for instance, like when I was doing like dev Q&As and stuff on YouTube, if they wanted to pull that and have it translated, they'd have to pull it from like language English, like from my interviews, and have it translated into Korean as like any type of supporting evidence or exhibits, which is true. They would. I still think that this statement is kind of weak though, because they're both companies are headquartered in Korea. Like the internal emails and everything that were getting sent back and forth, all of that stuff. I think the vast majority of the evidence is still going to end up being in Korean, but whatever. With respect to the public interest factors, the Ninth Circuit has instructed that a defendant's targeting of the United States favors resolution of a plaintiff's claims in the United States. Because defendants geo-blocked Korean users and targeted the United States as their primary market, the public interest strongly favors resolving Nexon's claims of infringement and misappropriation in the United States in a United States court rather than one in Korea. So, again, this was only geo-blocked in the very last playtest, which was a pittance in player base comparatively. It was not even close. Man, all right. With the presumption and weight of the forum nonconvenience factors overwhelmingly against them, defendants rely heavily on forum selection clauses in Choi's and Park's employment-related agreements, with Nexon calling for certain disputes to be litigated in Seoul. But as explained by Professor Suk, these clauses do not encompass disputes based on post-employment tortious conduct. We'll get to this in a second, but this is kind of weak too. Moreover, the type of forum selection clauses at issue has been authoritatively construed by the Korean Supreme Court as not reflecting the agreement to limit the filing of a lawsuit in a court outside of Korea. So they're trying to say that, like, well, nothing in the Korean legal system says that it can't be heard in other countries. Well, that's true, but we're not talking about what other countries allow. We're talking about what the United States allows. Additionally, ironmace cannot rely on these agreements because it is a non-signatory whose unlawful conduct had nothing to do with their performance. So, this is a directly disputed piece too. So, so what they're saying here is the contracts. So, this entire section is talking about how Terry Park and Mr. Choi signed documentation when they were employed at Nexon saying that if there was a dispute about any of this stuff that was going on during your employment at Nexon, that both parties agree to have it heard in a Seoul, South Korea court, right? But what this last piece is saying is that Ironmace, as a named defendant in the U.S. case, can't rely on that agreement because Ironmace wasn't a signatory of those employment contracts. But this is in direct opposition inside of the motion to dismiss that was filed from Ironmace. So this is like one of those things that's going to end up being argued. Also, one important thing here, they have this statement made. There's also another bit here that says note on motion calendar Friday, July 14th, meaning like 2 days on Friday. Oral argument requested. So they want an appearance to have the attorneys like actually stand in front of the judge and argue back and forth and see what the judge says. So this will have some type of a decision, I would assume, on Friday. If it doesn't, they'll end up recessing it and then they'll hear the rest of it like Monday, Tuesday, whatever. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Notably, defendants themselves do not believe in the forum selection clauses governing this dispute. When Ironmace sued Nexon in Korea, it sued in Suwon District Court, not Seoul. And defendants repeatedly argued Seoul Central District Court lacked jurisdiction. Principles of contact interpretation and judicial estoppel do not permit this court to reward defendants for telling this court that Seoul is the exclusive jurisdiction to hear the dispute, while they simultaneously tell the court in Suwon that the Seoul court lacks jurisdiction. So that piece is interesting too. Because this is about like a why, right? Like why is it being heard in Suwon and not in Seoul? And I think the reason why is because Ironmace is located in Suwon. So they filed the suit in their local court, right? Like I can either go to the court down the street or I can go to the court the next city over. That's going to be an hour plus worth of travel time for me in order to be able to get there to file it in the first place. And also, I think that this is a little bit weak too, because Nexon could have filed a suit in Seoul court once they were found that they had to respond to the claims that Ironmace made to get them to stop the DMCA process. So Nexon could have filed that suit in Seoul, but they didn't. They filed a counterclaim in Suwon court and decided to have it heard. So, I mean, I think this is kind of tossed already because it's already being litigated. Whether they agree that it's in Seoul or not is kind of irrelevant because it's already being fought, but whatever. While there's no agreement requiring Nexon to bring this suit in Seoul, Ironmace has agreed to litigate this dispute in the Western District of Washington in exchange for the privilege of invoking the DMCA's counter-notification procedure to pressure Valve to put Back Dark and Darker on its platform. Ironmace stated that Ironmace consents to the jurisdiction of the Western District of Washington. So this is the other huge part. This could be those two pieces could be the thing that ends up hurting them in getting this dismissed. Congress required Ironmace to make that statement to take advantage of the DMCA counter-notification process. Now, I love this. I love the verbiage. The verbiage for this is amazing to me, and this is why I love lawyers and legal proceedings, and like how the selection of language means everything. Congress' determination that this jurisdiction is an appropriate venue to sue a foreign defendant that avails itself of the DMCA's protection renders the judicial doctrine of forum nonconvenience unavailable as a basis for dismissal. Defendants, I love this, defendants purposefully targeted the United States and this district to violate United States copyright and trade secret law, and this district is the only forum that ironmace has agreed is the appropriate one for resolving the parties' dispute. So they're saying that they targeted the United States, meaning they marketed the game in the United States as a targeted market. This district, meaning Valve, headquartered in the district, to violate the United States copyright and trade secret law, allegedly. And this district is the only forum that ironmace has agreed is the appropriate one for resolving the parties' dispute. Well, that's not true. In the United States, that might be true, but they already have agreed that there's a particular forum in Suwon Court that they think is appropriate. For these reasons, the court should deny the defendant's motion. So there's a lot packed into that statement. But they also talk about how the DMCA is a privilege, and the response that was made was them exercising that privilege, when it was more like, well, their hands were tied because Steam is like the marketplace globally for selling games electronically. Like, there's other stores where you could do this, but Steam is by far and away the most robust platform and is used overwhelmingly. Like, they have a damn monopoly almost. Where they're going to go to like Epic Games store or something. Like, it's crazy. Cheeky. Yeah. Okay, so background. Nexon video game developer. Now, they love to hammer on this piece too. Defendant Terry Park is a United States citizen because he was born in the U.S. And Choi developed a video game on the project titled P3 that commenced July 2020. Consistent with industry practice and inherent limitations of standard computer programming language, the P3 project source code is in English. During their employment, Choi and Park entered into agreements with Nexon calling for disputes with respect to the agreements to be litigated in Seoul Central District Court. Now, so far, correct. Without authorization, Choi transferred source code and other confidential P3 project materials to his personal servers between December 2020 and June 2021. Also correct. Had no written permission. During this time, Choi told Nexon employees he had secured funding for a new company, and he solicited employees to leave Nexon to develop a game similar to P3. Now, this is according to the Hwang Declaration that they have, paragraph 38 to 43, 44, and 59. So, Hwang Declaration is right here. Paragraph 38. So they talk about Choi had exported over 11,000 files. Choi asked me for permission to export P3 source code. On August 31st, 2020, he was given permission. December 2020, he exported build files to his servers. So what this guy is saying is that Choi requested source code to be exported, which he was given permission to do because the game was in its infant stages. Starting in or around December of 2020, he exported P3 build files to his private servers. Now, also, I love the verbiage here, too. Build files are packs. The game is, like, executable, right? Like, they could essentially play the game at home. Running the build file would result in a playable version of P3. These build files are from a more advanced stage of P3 game development in the P3 source code. I never gave him approval to export P3 build files. So he's saying he only gave him permission to take source code, not build files. By February 2021, the P3 project was past the early prototyping stage, and Choi should have known that the temporary approval I gave him to export source code for testing was no longer valid. Should have known. I love that. Like, bro, you should have known better. So, mid-February, he asked for permission, and he says Choi recognized he no longer had permission to export source code, so he asked me for permission to gain export P3 source code on February 18th. So, the reason why I love this is because, let's say you're somebody that's under the gun. You're trying to make a deadline. It's crunch time. You're working from home. You got permission from, December of 2020 to be able to export source code. So from home, you're like, well, I got deadlines I got to meet. I'm just whatever, man. I know I don't have permission, for these specific things, but like you go a little bit outside of the boundaries. Fucking everybody does that, okay? I don't care what you do for a living. People start taking liberties when they're under deadlines, right? Because what's the old adage? It's always better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? Things get done quicker that way. So he's sending himself stuff that he didn't have explicit permission to do. I'm sure he wouldn't have been the first. And then this part where it's like, he should have known that he didn't have permission to be able to do this in February. It's like, okay, like maybe that's true.
Call me mother.
But I guarantee you when he started
Nexon.
doing it.
All my homies hate Nexon.
That's right. I guarantee you that when he started doing it, Gonda, thank you for the 9 months. I guarantee you that when he started doing it, it was probably more of a thought process of him going like, all right, well, I'm just trying to get some shit done. And then there was a light bulb that went off in his head that went like, oh, that permission is probably up right now. Shit, I've got to write that email. And it had been a few weeks, right? Because he probably had a deadline. Or there was a phone conversation, which isn't recorded, right? Only emails count. Or there was a phone conversation with like a buddy or like somebody that he was working next to, or it could have been fucking Terry, where Choi was like, oh shit, yeah, I got to see if I can get permission to work from home. Or there was a COVID surge and he had to work from home again. And he was like, listen, like my brother got fucking COVID and I'm worried that I might have it. I got to work from home for a week or two. Could I have permission to be able to do this? And they're like, no, you got to come to the office. Like, there's so many plausible scenarios in this where it's like, oh, well, he should have known, and then I denied him, so he did it anyway, but he didn't start doing it again until April. So like he worked, and then it was, he asked for permission, I told him no, he had to come into the office. So then he did that for like 3 weeks, right? At February 18, actually, no, sorry, he did it for 6 weeks, February 18th until April 6th. He fired the servers back up on April 6th and started sending project files back and forth again. So something was going on, like where he was going into the office between February and April, and then decided that he was going to start using the servers again. And obviously, the question behind all of this is why. Wasn't actually illegal. He got fired for it, and then he says he deleted all the stuff. Whether or not that actually happened, no one really knows because of other pieces of information in here that they were talking about. But the other, like, more damning thing in here, and another new piece that we didn't know before, is that there were more than just him pulling files. Based on this statement that he made, based on this declaration, this section, paragraph 49, since filing its complaint, Nexon learned that June 29th, Sung-Wook Hyun downloaded P3 data to an external hard drive. Moreover, on August 10th, he downloaded P3 data, including the list of purchased assets. The next day, on August 11th, Sung-Wook Hyun informed Nexon of his intent to leave and ultimately left the company on August 31st before joining ironmace. Since initiating this action, Nexon has recently learned that two former Nexon employees that joined ironmace, Sung-Wook Hyun and Tae-Woong Lee, had illicitly downloaded confidential P3 data before leaving Nexon. Nexon also learned that Tae-Woong Lee exported P3 data from Nexon without authorization from June 25th to July 6th. He also exported additional P3 data between August 6th and August 18th using iCloud. He left Nexon September 1st, 2021 before joining ironmace. So that's new. And then obviously the question is, okay, well, where's that information? Right? Now, a P3 data list, including a list of purchased assets, because you're like, here's the list of assets that were being used in the game on August 10th. Now that could be a problem. Because the question then is, all right, well, where's the list? Did you keep the list? Did you print the list? Right? Because now you're talking, it's not just about, because then it's not just about source code. Think of it like the alphabet. It's not just the alphabet, right? It's the usage of them, the arrangement, like music or literature. It's the arrangement of those items. And that's what's going to have to be compared. Now, all of this could have pertained to like shit that they had been doing as a part of their job. It could have been that, again, they were under the gun and they needed to do whatever they were doing. But this here, that he pulled a P3 data list of purchased assets, like he pulled the list of what assets were purchased from the store and then quit the next morning. That's rough. That's going to be rough. During this time, Choi told Nexon employees he had secured funding for a new company, and he solicited employees to leave Nexon to develop a game similar to P3. So this is paragraph 44. So Nexon learned that Choi solicited P3 team members to leave Nexon to develop a game similar to. Upon learning about Choi's recruiting efforts in June 21, Nexon conducted an audit. Nexon discovered that Choi had transferred P3 source code, build files, and other project-related data to his private servers without Nexon's authorization. So the question is all of that actually true? Like, he's saying that, yeah, we were told that he was soliciting people. Okay. Like, they don't have any supporting statements from people saying that, yes, I'm somebody that was solicited. They just have Nexon statements saying that he was soliciting employees. Now that, it could be true, or it could be like water cooler talk. It could have been him being like, fuck this, I'm just going to go make my own game because they're going to shut me down, right? It could have been shit he's saying in passing. It depends on what they are trying to pass as a solicitation, right? Because remember that they're going to try and make this sound as bad as they possibly can. Yeah? If you use those things to make dad, then it's a bigger problem. Right. So if the guy that quit, that took the list, right, breached contract, fine. Right? The question is whether or not ironmace was already looking at those lists, or already had those lists of assets, or if they just remembered which packs were being used. Because, like, it's not like they're using a lot of packs. If you look at, like, the list of files and stuff that they're using maybe like a dozen packs. Like, those guys don't need, I don't think that they would have needed the list to be able to go like, all right, well, we were using that asset pack and this one and this one. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's necessarily all that bad, but it doesn't look great. It would have been way better if that didn't happen, you know? The non-compete is likely in Korea, so I'm sure they could argue that it's applicable in the U.S. The non-compete would get completely tossed by the Ninth Circuit Court. It doesn't matter. If that was being heard in the U.S., they're going to toss the non-compete agreement right out the fucking window and burn it. Because in the Ninth Circuit Court, in Seattle especially, they've already had rulings on non-competes. People have to be like considered a key employee that make over like $162,000 a year as of 2022 in order to be able to be held to a non-compete. And there's no way that those guys are being compensated that heavily. Not based on what Nexon says the total nut for the cost of the development of that game was over like the 2-year period that it was being developed. There's no way that those guys were being paid that much money. With a team of 10 plus people and all of the costs internally for like the server usage and everything else, there's no way that they were being compensated that heavily. Right. Nexon would have to prove that those files were actually being used for Dark and Darker. Like, they can say that like people took things and then ended up going and working for this company, and the circumstantial piece of it looks pretty bad, right? But all that stuff is just hearsay in terms. It's one thing to say this guy took stuff. It's another thing to say this guy took stuff and he used it at ironmace. They have to prove the and in order to be able to rope it into the case. Otherwise, it just doesn't look great, but it's not proof, right? Okay. After Nexon learned of Choi's solicitation, it audited Choi and discovered his unauthorized transfers. Choi initially agreed to provide his service to permit Nexon to conduct a forensic audit. Choi reneged on his agreement and told Nexon he deleted all the data. Nexon terminated Choi on July 21st, 21. After approximately half of the P3 team left Nexon, including Park, Nexon temporarily suspended P3 on August 18th. Nexon has recently learned that in addition to Choi, 2 of the departed employees who now work for ironmace took P3 materials shortly before resigning. So, there was that other part. There was some interesting verbiage in here too. Paragraph 45. So during the audit, Choi initially agreed to cooperate and turn over private servers. On the way to inspect the servers, Choi instructed an acquaintance to permanently delete all of the files on his private servers. Despite agreeing to give Nexon access to the servers, Choi told Nexon he had the server wiped multiple times so that the files could not be recovered or viewed. So, this also doesn't look great. That doesn't look great. Because it's like, I'm on the train bringing you guys to the house to look at the servers, and then I send a text message to my buddy and tell him to delete everything, right? Like, degauss the whole damn drive. Like, delete everything, format it 7 times, you know, whatever, to make sure that, like, it's all gone. The question would be, right, like, why would you do that? Because there's 2 schools of thought here. One is, and we don't know which one is true, because this one says, on July 21, Nexon dismissed Choi for cause following an audit and disciplinary hearing. Park left Nexon on August 9th. So, the way that this reads is that there was an internal audit. He was still technically an employee. And then they were on their way to go and check the servers. And then he had him wiped, right? And up until now, the timeline has always kind of been like a question where it's like, was he still employed by you? Like, was this like after he left? Because according to ironmace, it was after he had parted with his employment that he had agreed that this could go on and then decided not to, which is well within his right, because again, like that employment agreement says, as soon as you leave employ, you have to delete all of the stuff on everything that you've got, right? So was he still employed or wasn't he, right? Like, it would have been a really interesting thing if he had made the statement that, like, at the point in time that we were looking to do this, he was still an employee of the company, right? Like, make that super clear. But they didn't do that. And then they say that obviously they dismissed him in July of 21. So I don't know if he was still employed by them or not. This leads us to believe that he was still an employee at this point, which then it's like, all right, well, why'd you delete the stuff if you were still working there? And it was like, well, probably because he was planning on quitting anyway. You know, he was going to leave, and they just kind of forced his hand earlier than maybe he wanted to. But at the same time, it's like, now they don't know what happened. Meaning Nexon. They don't know what happened to the files after that. Like, he had pulled them, right? There's no denying that. Like, he had pulled the files. If he actually deleted them all, okay, fine and good. But did you do anything with them before you deleted everything on that server? Because now they don't know, like, that's where the paper trail stops, right? They can't follow the trail of file transference from that server to anywhere else, because everything's been deleted from them. So they don't know whether or not all that stuff got uploaded, it got put on a thumb drive, it got sent off to his Aunt Myrtle's house. You know, like, no one has any idea what happens after that. Right. Also, they could have told him, and Dad Life is right, also they could have told him, right, like, they could have told him to delete everything in a phone call, but they have a paper trail saying that they were on their way to, like, go and look at it. They told him to delete all the files, so then he obliged them, right? But they did it as a verbal command or verbal order instead of, you know, or there could have been an argument like, well, we want to look over your servers. Okay, well, I guess that would be fine, maybe. What do you want to look at? And then there was some back and forth. He's like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to delete everything. Right? Like, on the train ride. They could have just gone into an argument and he just went like, fuck it, I'm just going to delete it all. Right? But they only have the paper trail. Yeah? Which, again, it doesn't look great, but it's not necessarily the whole story. Well, of course they're not going to be forward with a lot of the info. They don't want to be, right? They're only going to show what is going to support their case the most, yeah? Both sides will do that. Somewhere in between their stories is going to be the truth, and that's what the court's supposed to be figuring out, right? After approximately half the P3 team left Nexon, including Park, Nexon temporarily suspended P3 on August 18th. So, again, timeline being called into question, because ironmace's position on this has always been the game was slated to be remarked as a failure and was going to be shelved. That's what they've always said. In fact, I think Terry Park made in his statement that every project that he had worked on while he was at Nexon was ultimately shelved. So the belief was that it was going to be shelved or had already been shelved by the time that these guys were leaving. So Nexon is obviously going to say that the game was destined for success. It was going to be great. It was greenlit, which they have said in their initial court filing. They said basically the game was greenlit and it was going to be a market success, and we knew this. And then these guys quit because they wanted to copy our game, which made us have to suspend it, right? And the motivation behind those two things are vastly different. Nexon has recently learned that in addition to Choi, 2 of the departed employees who now took P3 materials. Okay. Choi and Park co-founded ironmace in October of 21. While defendants portray this dispute as between a large corporation and a group of independent game developers, defendants have not presented any financial information or other evidence establishing that they are unable to afford the cost of litigating in the United States. Bro. Really? Really? Let's just say, all right, so this is funny. Let's just say that, let's say that Terry's doing pretty good for himself, right? Let's say that Terry's doing pretty good for himself. Let's say Terry's got a net worth of $5 million, right? Between his assets, the things that he owns, and I'm not even saying that he does. I have no idea what the guy's worth. He could be worth nothing. He's got his dojo or whatever that he converted into a studio or into an office to be able to make the game or whatever. Let's just say that he's worth $5 million. Okay? There is a big difference between a company that's worth $5 million or a guy that's worth $5 million trying to defend himself and a company worth $32 billion. $1 billion, a billion is 1,000 times a million. That means that Nexon, asset-wise, is 6,000 times larger than Terry. In all of the assets that Terry could have, if he was worth $5 million bucks. Nexon has 6,000 times more assets to be able to fight this court case out. While they want to lean on this, I don't give a shit who you are. Terry ain't no billionaire. And even if he was worth $1 billion, Nexon is 30 times larger than that. So, like, they don't have unlimited funds, and Nexon is still the much, much, much bigger fish in this. So I find, like, this statement to be absolutely ludicrous. Like, that's so dumb. Yeah, like, dude, that would be like Microsoft tapping on my front door going like, we want to see your financial statements. You haven't proven that you can't defend yourself for years. Like, bro, really? You're fucking Microsoft. Like, what the fuck? It's so crazy. Less than a year after its founding, ironmace released a demo of a game entitled Dark and Darker on Steam, relying on service provided by Amazon. Yada, yada, yada. Here's all the playtest dates. Okay. Blackburn Declaration. The textual elements of Dark and Darker are in English. Furthermore, because standard programming languages are built on the English alphabet, Dark and Darker's source code is most likely in English as well. While defendants' brief claims their source code is in Korean, their declarations do not. Okay. Defendants heavily marketed Dark and Darker in the United States, promoting the game in English to a large number of followers on Twitter and Discord. Okay. Park also went on media tours on the channels of English-speaking YouTubers. Hey, that's me. Promoting the game to United States audiences. In one public relations stunt, even directed players to search for a physical QR code located under a bench in New York Central Park, which we found. You're welcome. Defendants admitted that at least one playtest was meant to test basic online gameplay for North America's region, and in a QA test instructed players in the United States to use servers nominally designated for the European Union. As a result, players in the United States represented defendants' largest market, accounting for up to 66.34% of players, depending on the playtest. That number's super fucking high. Okay, they're cherry-picking this stat. They're cherry-picking the shit out of the stat. And I'm going to guess that the reason why, or the cherry-picking that got done is probably from the very first or the very last playtest. Because what they're going to do is, I'm going to bet that there's going to be like the pie charts that they were sharing. Let's see. Huang Declaration was 40. There's going to be pie charts from when the Discord was posting the player stats. Let's see. That's an email. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So here's all the player stat stuff. April 14th, February 6th, December 16th, October 28th, August 19th. So they didn't include the September playtest, which is interesting. So this is the very first playtest. And this is the United States. This piece of the pie. 66.34%. Yep, you're right. That's true. Except this playtest had maybe 200 people in it. There was almost nobody playing this. They don't even have the listed. See, notice they have player counts. 266K, 1.1 million, 1.9 million, right? Created Steam accounts for the game. They don't have any Steam account listed for this. And this was played through Steam. They omitted how many players there were for this. There were like 200 players of the entire playtest. Closer to 1K. All right, you're right. Yeah, sorry. 1,000 players. That's only 266 times less than the second or third playtest that they're listing here that show players' stats. You're absolutely right. Yep, that is a marked difference and very important. Sorry. 1,000 people. So, which if you look as the playtests progressed, with the exception of the uTorrent one, or the BitTorrent, the client, the torrent cliented one, the stats for the US base shrinks. So this is 66.34, and then it's 45.8 for playtest in October, and then it's 38.67 in December, and then in February it's 31.52. Only in the torrented client does it go back up to 39%. Now, that being said, this one at 31.52 still puts Japan second at 11.3, but also shows Korea at 10%. So it's not like the SEA market doesn't have a market share, right? You've got 4% in China, 11% in Japan, 10% in Korea, right? And I would also posit that population density-wise, 10% of the Korean population playing the playtest where they had the biggest, where they had the largest splash would be pretty significant, right? Yes, I realize that it still makes the statement technically true, but that doesn't mean that the statement isn't misleading. Say, like, yes, they accounted up to 66% of players. Yeah, that's true, but there were hardly any players at that point. And if the player counts remained at like 1,000-ish and the game was relatively a failure, Nexon never would have sued ironmace for this. Because Nexon's looking at this as money. And this matters why? Because they're trying to make it sound as though the game is heavily marketed toward the United States. And it is. It is. It's just that this stat is horribly misleading when you're talking like, oh, it's its largest market. 2/3 of the players play in the United States. Oh, wow. 2/3 of the players are in the United States. That's insane, right? But it's 2/3 of the players of 1,000 people, not 2/3 of the players of 2 million people. Considerably different. Because Dark and Darker violates Nexon's rights, Nexon sent a DMCA notice because Dark and Darker violates Nexon's rights. Okay, might have violated. Nexon sent a DMCA notice to Valve on March 22nd requesting that Valve take down Dark and Darker, and Valve complied on March 25th. In response, on April 10th, ironmace filed a preliminary injunction request against Nexon and Suwon Court, seeking an inter alia, an order enjoining takedown requests to Valve. Timmy had 5 apples, 3 oranges, 1 bundle of bananas, 7 marbles. What was Timmy's name? Right. Yeah, and what else is, like I said, the interesting part is that they showed how many players, like what the player count was for every single playtest, except the first one, which is the one that they pulled that stat from. And if you showed that, like there's a difference between showing, well, 422,000 players versus 950, you know? Like, big difference. Relatively unknown versus widespread. Yeah? Like, I could run around the city I live in and market a video game just to my own city
and then be like, oh, 100% of players were in the United States for that play test, right? Up to 100% of players. And then it gets put on a market somewhere where the globe gets to play it, and then it's like, oh, only 30% now. Like, it's a huge difference. On April 14th, Nexon responded to ironmace's filing by applying for a preliminary injunction in Suwon District Court seeking an order under Korean copyright and trade secret law barring the distribution of Dark and Darker. So, I'm thinking that the Suwon court was just because it was close. I think it was just it's local court because that's where ironmace is. Defendants did not sue in Seoul, the jurisdiction identified in the forum selection clauses defendants rely on in the present motion. Well, they didn't sue under that identified jurisdiction in the forum selection clause because it wasn't on them. It was on Nexon to file that suit regarding copyright claim because Nexon said it was their property, and ironmace is seeking relief in their own district court over a DMCA claim that had been made prior to them and trying to keep that from happening in Korea at the same time. So they weren't really they're not really invoking that clause, but whatever, it doesn't matter. In the case of Nexon counterclaiming, that would invoke the clause. But defendants repeatedly took the position that Seoul Central District Court lacks jurisdiction on the merits Nexon claims. Okay. Nexon filed this action on April 14th, alleging in its complaint that the defendant acts of copyright infringement and misappropriation targeting the United States violated the United States Copyright Act and Defend of Trade Secrets Act. ironmace sent a DMCA counter notification to Valve. Okay, so this is where it's going to get funky. ironmace sent a DMCA counter notification to Valve requesting Valve put back Dark and Darker on Steam, in which it stated, ironmace consents to the jurisdiction of the Western District of Washington. After Valve notified Nexon it would put back Dark and Darker on Steam unless Nexon filed suit within 10 business days, Nexon notified Valve of the pendency of the action. So again, this is that whole thing where the DMCA being an archaic fucking cave tool and everything is a nail when you're a hammer. And this is why the DMCA needs to be rewritten. So what they're trying to say is Nexon claiming that ironmace was in violation of copyright strong arms ironmace into action. They have no choice. Well, they have a choice. The choice is we respond or we don't. If we don't, it never sees the light of day ever again. So I don't invoke my fucking privilege of being able to counterclaim on this and say, all right, well, they file a DMCA claim, guess I'm fucked. Right? No dispute. The problem is that those are the only two choices you have. It's dispute it or don't dispute it. But because they're foreign and they disputed it, they have to say that they consent to the jurisdiction of the court, which automatically ropes them in and is what these guys are leaning on to say that because they said that they consented to the jurisdiction of the court, then it must be heard in the United States because they themselves are now relying on DMCA's legal process in order to dispute it in the first place. Now, nothing has seen the light of day in court at all until this point, right? So when they say that they consent to the jurisdiction of the Western District Court, and they have to do that in order to be able to contest the validity of the DMCA claim, they're saying that Nexon is saying, well, that ties their hands. They have to have it heard in court now. It can't be dismissed due to forum anymore. But again, those are the two choices. I'm fucked and I can't list my game now ever again because I'm going to let the DMCA stick, or I try to fight it, and in trying to fight it, I'm saying that I'm going to fight it in a United States court. When I say that I'm going to fight it, Nexon has to file a claim, like in a court proceeding. They have to go ahead and file a lawsuit, or it could then not only allow the game to be relisted, but it also ropes them into a suit from ironmace could have sued Valve over it, and Nexon over it, for having listened and taken the game down. So it's kind of a shitty spot, because if I'm a foreign company and another company files a DMCA claim against me, frivolous or otherwise, it just ropes me up in a court process. No matter what I do, I'm roped up in a court process in the US because of that stupid statement that has to get made in order to be able to push it forward. Defendants ran a fifth alpha playtest from April 14th and 19th. Defendants continued to rely on Amazon servers to host the game. They relied on BitTorrent rather than Steam to distribute it.
Because Dark and Darker does not comply with Korean video game regulations, defendants geo-blocked Korean players from playing Dark and Darker. See, like down in here, they talk about how the Korean law doesn't support the distribution of games through a torrent client. Right here, they say it. But they don't mention that in the initial summary, right? They only talk about how, well, they blocked Korea. So therefore, it was heavily marketed to the US because they blocked Korea. But here they finally end up going, well, it was illegal. They couldn't distribute it in Korea the way that they did, so they had to block Korea. They were forced to. In the Suwon litigation, defendants took the position that they created Dark and Darker independently with a blank slate rather than copying and misappropriating from P3. However, defendants refused to produce their source code. Now, this is the other piece that's interesting that will likely end up keeping this in the US if it is followed by the judge. Defendants refused to produce their source code, and the Suwon court cannot and did not compel them to do so. The Suwon court conducted 3 hearings and might receive additional briefings on July 19th before the court's decision. So right now, there's like 5,000+ pages of documentation provided by Iron Mace and Nexon to pore over. But it appears that Iron Mace has not been as forthcoming with their evidence as would satisfy Nexon. And it's in this the Park Declaration, but we'll look at that. Defendants continue to express plans to move forward, release of Dark and Dark in the United States. Yeah, of course they do, and they should until they're ordered that they can't. Okay, so the M Park Declaration, this guy, Minjung Park. So Minjung Park was a judge for 13 years. He has 23 years of experience in legal practice. He gave lectures on Korean law practice in the first half of every year from 2017 to 22. He was brought in as an adjunct like professor at Duke University. The guy is really well versed in IP law. He says he's litigated over 300 cases, I think, of different IP cases. So he talks, and he's also a consultant for the plaintiff. Okay, so again, grain of salt. So after learning, serves as counsel for Nexon. After learning Choi had engaged in unauthorized transfers, Nexon filed a criminal complaint against Choi and filed an application for preliminary attachment of real property, automobiles, and deposits with the Seoul Central District Court, which was granted and enforced in its entirety. So you want to talk about preliminary injunction kind of shit. Choi has liens on his home, his cars, and his bank accounts. So if they're going to argue that, like, we don't know whether or not Iron Mace has real assets or not. Okay, well, one of the key players in that company that you're suing and trying to force out of being able to make their game has all of his shit tied up by the court. He's got liens on everything. In response to the criminal complaint, the police searched Choi's home and Iron Mace's office in January of 22. In Korea, only the prosecutors have authority to indict. In August of 22, the police transferred the case to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation to indict Choi in charges of violation of the Unfair Competition Prevention and Trade Secret Protection Act. So, that also is new. Nexon became aware of the existence of Dark and Darker around the end of September of 22. After the second playtest was disclosed, the prosecutor's office requested the police conduct a supplemental investigation. In March of 23, the police conducted another search of Iron Mace's office. The prosecutor's office has not yet announced the decision to indict Choi. So, the police raided Choi's house and made a recommendation to indict him under the act. And the prosecutor's office hasn't announced a decision to actually do that, though. So I'm wondering whether the prosecutor figures the case is strong enough. Maybe the police are like, here's the evidence, you should indict him. And the prosecutor wonders whether or not the case is strong enough. But I don't know. Okay, in August of 21, Nexon filed a civil action against Choi, seeking an injunction against trade secret misappropriation and damages. At the time Nexon filed this action, Nexon was not aware that Choi and Park were developing Dark and Darker or that they were directing their misconduct to the United States. Misconduct. Nexon's intent at the time was to contain the data leak by Choi and minimize the damages. So again, though, this is them saying he stole stuff from us. Not he stole stuff from us and was using it to develop a new game. And they don't have any paper trail from any of these investigations that they did that shows that the game was being made using the stuff that Choi took. Choi has not submitted a response to this case initiating document, and the Seoul Central District Court has not set any hearing dates. Accordingly, the case against Choi has not progressed beyond the case initiating document. This process is consistent with typical Korean procedures where a criminal case and a civil case are pending at the same time. Because Korean civil courts do not have a pretrial discovery process, civil courts rely on evidence adduced in the criminal investigation, meaning civil courts will allow criminal cases to proceed before moving forward with a civil case. Okay, so the civil case is on pause until the criminal case concludes. Okay, whatever. Ironmace initiates litigation in Suwon Court. I understand the defendants have taken a position in the U.S. litigation. All disputes between Nexon and the defendants concerning Nexon's allegation of trade secrets and copyright infringement is subject to the exclusive jurisdiction of Seoul Central District Court, pursuant to certain employment-related agreements between Nexon, Choi, and Nexon and Park. Contrary to the position that defendants are taking in this court, on March 31st, Ironmace initiated an action on the merits for confirmation of copyright non-infringement and prohibition of business interference in Suwon Court against Nexon. And on April 10th, Ironmace initiated an action for preliminary injunction in Suwon Court against Nexon for business interference. Defendants have argued throughout the preliminary injunction proceedings that Seoul Central District Court lacks jurisdiction over the dispute. So they're trying to prevent it from being moved to Seoul Court. And my guess is because the Suwon Court is local. There's a difference between having to travel 5 or 10 or 15, 20 minutes and having to travel an hour, hour and a half plus. Because from where they're located in Suwon, they have to take public transit, and the distance is like an hour plus by train from the station, or from courthouse to courthouse. It's over an hour, not including like wherever the hell they're living. So I'm guessing that the reason why they're arguing this is just because they don't want to have to travel that much in order to be able to have it heard. The Republic of Korea is divided into 17 administrative districts. Suwon Court is located in this province. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, which is a different administrative district from the administrative district in which Seoul Central District Court is located. The two district courts have separate appellate courts. The appellate court for Suwon Court is Suwon High Court, while the appellate court for Seoul Central District Court is Seoul High Court. Okay, that makes sense. Ironmace requests to the Suwon Court include the following: a request to confirm that Ironmace has not violated Nexon's copyrights under Korean law, and a request to preliminarily prohibit Nexon from making a request to a third party such as Valve to take down Dark and Darker from Steam, alleging it constitutes unlawful business interference in the lawsuit on the merits in the preliminary injunction action. To the best of my knowledge, defendants have never initiated any proceedings against Nexon in the Seoul Central District Court. So again, though, Nexon is the party that's saying that Ironmace was infringing on their copyright. Ironmace is just saying we want them to stop interfering with us. So they aren't going after what is actually outlined in those contracts in regard to copyright infringement and what they're actually arguing over with copyright. I think that's an important distinction, though, because Nexon's whole position is like they're stealing from us. Ironmace is just trying to say, tell them to stop bullying. Right? They're bullying us they're bullying our company. Nexon filed countersuit saying that Ironmace stole from them, but they did the counterclaim in the Suwon Court. They could have used the Seoul Court themselves and chose not to. So I still think that means Nexon chose that forum, and it's still preferred. But whatever. On April 14th, 4 days after Ironmace initiated preliminary injunction proceedings, Nexon responded by initiating its own preliminary injunction proceedings in Suwon Court against Ironmace, Choi, and Park. There you go. In the preliminary injunction proceedings, Nexon alleges that Dark and Darker infringes. None of the defendants objected to Nexon's filing in Suwon Court as being precluded by the forum selection clauses in the employment-related agreements between Nexon and Choi and Nexon and Park. Well, of course they didn't, because they had already started their own proceedings in the Suwon Court. I mean, that's like a duh statement. Anyway, in addition to Nexon filing its preliminary injunction proceeding in Suwon Court, the defendants not objecting to Nexon's filing in Suwon Court, defendants have repeatedly told Suwon Court that Seoul Court lacks jurisdiction over the dispute. Well, because they don't want to move it. Because they already started it in the local court, and that's where they live. Yo, what up, Sacriel? How you doing, buddy? For example, at hearings on May 3rd and May 24th and June 21st, the defendants argued that the Seoul Central District Court has no jurisdiction over the case. Right. They don't. Because it's being heard in the Suwon Court. Yeah. Okay. At a hearing on May 24th, defendant presented a PowerPoint slide to a Suwon court that states in order to delay the proceedings, in August 21, Nexon filed a lawsuit against Choi in Seoul Central District Court rather than the Suwon District Court or Songnam District Court, both of which would have proper jurisdiction over the lawsuit. The relevant page of this presentation is attached as Exhibit A. This is such a weird argument to be making. Because they're saying that the guys that are defending themselves, the defendants, should have filed this in the court that they had agreed to in the documentation that the defense in the United States case is citing. But I don't think it was on them, though. In ironmace's moving paper seeking a preliminary injunction, ironmace stated that the Suwon District Court has territorial jurisdiction over the dispute, and the Suwon District Court is the competent court of jurisdiction for this temporary injunction against the business obstruction. In no part of its moving papers did ironmace contend that Seoul Central District had exclusive jurisdiction over the dispute. Again, it's just local to them, because that's where their office is. Particularly in light of Choi's intentional pre-suit destruction of evidence regarding his unauthorized export of P3 project files and source code, documents related to the defendant's development of Dark and Darker are critical in refuting their contention that they independently created Dark and Darker rather than copying and misappropriating it. Defendants have taken advantage of Korean procedural rules to successfully conceal such evidence about Dark and Darker. Okay. So here's the weird meat of it. Before filing the preliminary injunction, ironmace publicly claimed it would be transparent about the development of Dark and Darker, and that such transparency would reveal that ironmace had not copied or misappropriated Nexon's materials. For example, in response to the takedown of Dark and Darker from Steam on March 27th, ironmace posted an open letter online which it stated, "We welcome Nexon to promptly accommodate the comparison of source code, custom assets, and design documents with the police to quickly and decisively put an end to this matter." And then they copied the Exhibit B. So that's that big like multi-paragraph Discord statement that Terry made. So this is interesting. Nexon is unable to compel the defendants to produce material in the pending preliminary injunction proceedings. However, in light of ironmace's promises of transparency, after the first hearing on the party's preliminary injunction, Nexon requested that the defendants provide any and all materials related to the development of Dark and Darker. In return, Nexon offered to provide defendants with any and all materials related to the development of P3. Defendants rejected the offer and took the position that they were only willing to share the latest version of the game from the 5th playtest. That is interesting. That is interesting. So, So ironmace has always stated that they have no problem providing that information to a disinterested third party. Third-party auditor is what they've always said. What it sounds like to me is that ironmace is saying they don't want to give Nexon their shit. And I think that that's fair. Because they've always contested that Nexon was biased. Clearly so. I mean, like in all of their court documentation, they're showing bias. I mean, they're going to anyway. But they've always said third-party auditor. If they had assurances that the court or somebody appointed by the court would be a third-party auditor to look it over, and that none of the information would be shared with Nexon, then I don't think that they would deny it. I think that they'd be okay. But at the second preliminary injunction hearing on May 24th, Nexon requested defendants produce the initial versions of Dark and Darker, meaning the playable versions of the game, from the 1st to 5th playtests, along with all data related to its development. At the hearing, defendants' counsel stated they would discuss the matter with their clients. After the second hearing, the parties continued to discuss the issue by email. Defendants reiterated in these emails that they refused to produce all development data unless Nexon withdrew its takedown request made pursuant to the US DMCA to Valve, and agreed not to take any steps that would interfere with the business until the decision of preliminary injunction becomes final and conclusive in Korea to stop defendants from distributing Dark and Darker. Thus, defendants conditioned the production of Dark and Darker development data on Nexon, effectively conceding to the defendants the relief ironmace sought in its preliminary injunction. So, that's a weird way to do it, too. I don't know if I agree. Like, that's strange. So then they're saying that the only way that they're going to give up the information that Nexon wants is if Nexon removes their DMCA claim. That'll never happen. They would never do that. At the third hearing on June 21st, the parties did not reach an agreement on the production of Dark and Darker in P3, therefore the exchange of all game-related data was canceled. Okay. Despite defendants' failure to produce this critical evidence, the Suwon court cannot compel defendants to produce any documents. So here's the argument. So this is the argument right here. So then now what they're going to do is they're going to frame this in a way where they're saying that Korean court, preliminary Korean court, civil court, can't compel them to give up their stuff. They can't make them share their source code. Neither party can. They don't have to. The court can't make them do it either. And because the court can't make them do it, ironmace didn't provide their source code, and neither did Nexon. So it's not, and like, while this looks really bad, it's not like Nexon put their best foot forward and was like, well, here's our source code, and like handed it over to the court either. Like, neither party did that. So it's not like Nexon is going white knight on this, because Nexon didn't show the source code to the court themselves either. But while the court may issue an order nominally requiring defendants to produce the documents, the court can't enforce it. Furthermore, the Suwon court did not hear any oral testimony, and it did not permit the cross-examination of any witnesses. The third hearing was the last hearing. The parties' written briefs, July 19th. So the parties may file written briefs until July 19th, after which time the Suwon court is expected to issue a decision. I understand defendants' motion before this court to state that in the Suwon court proceedings, a Korean panel of judges will evaluate the evidence, including ironmace's internal notes and source code showing exactly how Dark and Darker was created. That's interesting. That statement is false in two respects. The defendants did not submit any source code, and the Suwon court will be unable to review that because of that. Second, with the exception of certain initial plans for Dark and Darker, defendants did not submit any development documentation. The defendants did not submit the initial test version of Dark and Darker and documents related to the development of Dark and Darker, despite Suwon court's request that they do so. The small number of documents defendants submitted to the Suwon court do not show the complete development process of Dark and Darker. Thus, it is misleading to state the defendants submitted internal notes showing exactly how Dark and Darker was created. I note that in his declaration, defendant's Korean attorney, Young Jun describes the evidence submitted in the cases, including copies of Nexon employment agreements with Choi, copies of Nexon's acknowledgement about company IP, signed by Choi and Park, computer logs and internal data from Nexon, emails, written witness statement, text message, and transcript of oral conversations. Mr. Jian does not describe the production of ironmace's source code or development documents. While this portion of Mr. Jian's declaration is accurate, the statements in the defendant's motion to this court is not. Interesting. So again, that does not look good. Now, again, but they're framing this in a way where it's like, well, they didn't show their source code. Now, they wrote that they did, that's untrue. But it's also possible at the point in time that they wrote that. I'd have to look at the datings of it. It's possible at the point in time that they wrote that, it was assumed that was going to happen. And then it was decidedly not going to happen. I don't know. It depends exactly when the motion was filed. Let's see. 6/22. And then when's this statement? Third hearing on June 21st was the last hearing of the preliminary injunction. Yeah, okay. So then they filed the motion to dismiss the day after the final date. But that's also dated. It's filed the 22nd on our calendar. Right? So if this was done on 6/21, it's possible that the statement was written prior to when they filed the motion to dismiss. I mean, it could have been, it's really tight timing, but it's possible that the attorney had written that up and sent it off to the U.S. attorney to file the day before or 2 days before. I don't know. Yo, Nico Ortiz, what up, man? Thank you for the raid, dude. Thank you very much. Hope you had a good day. They did say that they would to a third party, yeah. And it's just possible that ironmace didn't want Nexon to have access to their stuff. In fact, I know that Nexon had requested that they have their stuff, and ironmace had refused, but the reason why they refused is because they didn't want Nexon to have it. Raid. Indeed it is. What up, everybody? We're talking about Nexon court stuff, which might be super boring for a lot of y'all, and I apologize if it's super boring, but, yeah. Okay. Defendants ran a 5th alpha playtest, blah, blah, blah. Defendants geo-blocked. Yep. Okay. Defendants continue, move forward. Yep. Okay, so here we are. DMCA bars consideration of form nonconvenience. Before dismissing a case for form nonconvenience, a district court must make a choice of law determination. This choice of law analysis is only determinative when the case involves a U.S. Statute requiring venue in the United States, such as the Jones Act, or the FELA. In Zippel, for example, the Ninth Circuit Court held a court may not dismiss a Jones Act claim. Ninth Circuit Court relied on Baltimore, in which the Supreme Court held that the privilege of venue granted by the legislative body, which created the right of action, blah, 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 cannot be frustrated for reasons of convenience or expense. Okay? Ninth Circuit explained that the outcome in Kepner flowed from the fact that FELA contained a specific venue provision. The specific venue provision in FELA stated that an action may be brought in a district court in the United States and a district court of the residence of the defendant, or in which the cause of action arose, or in which the defendant shall be doing business. So what they're trying to say is that business, where they're doing business, is through Valve, through Steam, and Valve is located in the Ninth Circuit, so they're going to go to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit extended Kepner to the Jones Act inter alia because it contained a special venue provision under which jurisdiction shall be blah, 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 blah. Defendant employer resides in, or in which has principal office is located. Because the Jones Act contained a specific venue provision, the Ninth Circuit held form nonconvenience was unavailable as a ground for dismissal. Okay. Similarly, the Supreme Court construed the Clayton Act may be brought not only in the judicial district whereof as an inhabitant, but also in a district where it be found or transacts business. So again, they're just trying to stack this up by saying that Valve is where its business is being done. Therefore, it should be heard here because this is where business is happening. All the business is being transacted through Valve. Now, one could argue that there isn't actually any business being transacted. It's only been pure expense because there's been no money made by the folks over at ironmace at all. But I don't know. To broaden the choice of venue for the reasons which brought about the action, only to have it narrowed again by application of the vague and discretionary power comprehended by form nonconvenience would have been incongruous to say the least. Okay? Is there going to be a test on this info later? Yes. Yeah, I hope you guys brought some Adderall and got your number 2 pencils ready. I'm going to have a bubble card handed out. Let's see. I think Demon Turtle is going to be handing out the bubble cards for everybody to fill out, okay? It's got to be a Dixon Ticonderoga number 2 pencil, all right? It can't be one of those shit knockoffs. It better be a Dixon Ticonderoga number 2 or you're all fired. All right, I'm just saying. All right, Congress has enacted a specific venue provision applicable to a narrow subset of copyright cases involving a foreign defendant who invokes the DMCA counter-notification process. I am on Ritalin, sir, not Adderall. I'm more of a mechanical pencil kind of guy. Wait, you guys don't know about the Dixon Ticonderoga number 2 pencil? Jesus, that's like gold standard, baby. Concerta gang, fine product. Yeah, skating knows. What up, boy? Hell yeah. Yeah, for lead poisoning. What Rim, you know that they don't actually put lead. You know what? Whatever. I'm gonna let you go with it. Let's just say it would behoove you to look up the word graphite. Anyway, a copyright owner may send a takedown notice to an online service provider requesting that the service provider remove allegedly infringing content. If the service provider complies with the takedown notice, the DMCA permits but does not require the alleged infringer to send a putback counter notification to the service provider. So I love this language. So this is the shit that gets me hopped up, okay? Because I think that they do have like some compelling pieces here. The piece about them not being compelled to share evidence or testimony would be something that I think the judge would take an interest in. But this piece I think is super fucking weak, even though I think it's still going to stick though. And this is why I say the DMCA needs to be rewritten. So under the DMCA, a copyright owner may send a takedown notice to an online service provider requesting the service provider remove allegedly infringing content. Remember, the word is allegedly infringing. So it's not actually infringing, but because DMCA causes people to have such cold feet, it makes the service provider comply. Like, if this says if the service provider complies with the takedown notice, every service provider complies. All of them. Almost no DMCA claims are tossed because the service providers are so fucking worried that they're going to end up roped into a case that they're just like, okay, clearly that's got to be valid, right? You do it right. You can go on YouTube right now. Pick a video.
Now, you'd be a fucking asshole for doing this, but this is what happened to Pestily. When we did the 12 days of Tarkov Christmas or whatever, what's his name? Rook Kale, that piece of shit, ended up filing a DMCA claim against that song that we all put together on YouTube and threw up on a site to benefit Calaveri, the Australian musician that scored the entire thing himself on VODs, and then put in all of our vocals on top of all of that. He made that completely frivolous claim, and it locked that video down for over a month. Because the moment that he made the claim, YouTube just went, we pulled it. And then you can dispute it. Right? Somebody can go, all right, well, I dispute. Okay. But when you dispute it, there's a process. Yeah, it's a big delayed process. So for them to be like, if the service provider complies, they always comply. The DMCA permits but does not require the alleged infringer to send a putback notification. So the DMCA permits but is not required, or does not require someone, the person that says that they were does not require the infringer to send a putback counter notification. So this is a perfect example, right? This thing with Rook Kale and Pestily on YouTube is a perfect example of this. Rook sends the DMCA claim. Pestily is in Australia. Rook is in the United States. Pestily, in filing the petition, or in filing the dispute to say, like, wait a second, no, this is valid. In doing so, Pestily has to agree that the United States court is the presiding body, right? Like, that's the rule. So, alleged infringer to send a putback notification is they have verbiage to this. They put this in there as the privilege of enacting that. If Pestily had not wanted to go through that process and didn't want to give jurisdiction to the U.S. court, the only other alternative is that video stays down forever. And Rook wins. Like, those are the two outcomes. So in this case, they're basically like, well, yeah, they said that the court, they gave jurisdiction to the court, but they didn't have to. Like, they could have just left it alone. Well, if they left it alone, then it would have stayed dead. So, like, hands are tied, like, they get roped into it. They have no choice. So, like, Nexon was the person that started this entire process. If the service provider fails to heed the counter notification and put back the content, the service provider may be held liable to the alleged infringer for a wrongful takedown, unless the copyright owner files a lawsuit seeking injunctive relief within 10 days. So again, forcing hands. Nexon forces the hand of ironmace, who in response forces the hand of Nexon. And in doing so, they're trying to say that because they did that, they gave the consent of the jurisdiction for the case to the Ninth Circuit Court. They had no choice. Not really. It's like, yeah, you can bash your head against this stone wall, or you can bash your head against this concrete floor, but you're still going to bash your head. In granting alleged infringers the privilege of sending counter notifications, I love this, Congress required an alleged infringer whose address is outside of the United States to state in its counter notification that it consents to the jurisdiction of any judicial district in which the service provider may be found. In this case, there is no dispute that ironmace availed itself of the privilege of sending a counter notification to Valve, and there is no dispute that Valve, which is headquartered in Bellevue, can be found in this district. Thus, under the statutory scheme, Nexon is entitled to a venue in this district against the defendants. It's kind of shitty. It's kind of shitty. I'm old enough to know how to use a rotary phone, but not have any issues with a smartphone. Oh, dude, Nathan's the best, man. I love that guy. For Congress to grant Nexon a federal forum to enforce its United States copyrights against those who, like ironmace, invoke DMCA and consent to jurisdiction in a specified venue, only to have that federal forum taken away by application of the vague and discretionary power comprehended by forum nonconvenience would have been incongruous, to say the least. By its plain terms, the DMCA evinces a congressional judgment that copyright owners should not face the uncertainties of litigating domestic rights overseas, but instead should have the right to a federal forum to vindicate their United States copyrights against foreign defendants that have taken advantage of the DMCA counter notification process. Taken advantage of. Love it. Well, you guys chose to use this. Well,
I mean, we were kind of forced into having to use it. We probably would have been fine just leaving our game up and then figuring this out in Korean court, but Ironmace brought a preliminary injunction application in Suwon Court, blah, 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 for an order prohibiting Nexon from requesting a third party such as Valve to take down Dark and Darker from Steam. Thus, Ironmace could have chosen to rely solely on the protections of Korean law and Korean courts to advance its position. Rather than doing so, Ironmace expressly invoked the DMCA counter notification process. But they didn't start this proceeding until after Nexon had filed the suit that they did. And there's no guarantee that the Korean law, the preliminary injunction, if it was granted, there's no guarantee that that would have actually held any merit in U.S. court anyway. Because I guarantee you, Nexon would have just argued in U.S. court that the Korean verdict had no jurisdiction in the United States. And besides, like, if that's true, though, if they're, like, and here's the other weird piece. So, like, if they're saying that Ironmace could have relied on the protections of Korean law and Korean courts to advance the position of this preliminary injunction that they're seeking against Nexon, right? If they're conceding that there's the possibility of that being realistic, then that means that if the injunction were granted at the end of this month, that Nexon would then honor that and remove the DMCA? I don't fucking believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second. It sounds like these guys are trying to argue out of both sides of their face. Blackburn declared the above, because Congress has determined the alleged infringers who invoke the DMCA counter notification process are subject to litigation in the venue of the jurisdiction, blah, 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 blah. This court may not invoke forum nonconvenience so long as United States copyright law applies. So, but this is weird. They're saying that Ironmace brings preliminary injunction against Nexon. Ironmace could have waited to see what happened instead of invoking DMCA counter notification. Which, yeah, potentially possible, but that also means that in that same vein that Nexon is conceding that the Korean law would have been followed, or their attorneys are conceding the Korean law would have been followed. And I don't think anybody fucking buys that, because if they believe that Korean law would have been followed, they would have just sought that out themselves, and they were the ones that filed the DMCA claim to begin with. No, it's not the paid version of Adobe. No. Lawsuit streams, are we old? What? Since when does intelligence have to rely on age, Demo? I mean, it's outside of high school. Hi, Demo. How's Mortal Online 2? Here, because the defendants infringed domestically, United States copyright law applies when a foreign work is allegedly infringed in the United States. United States law applies to determine whether infringement has occurred, and if so, what remedies are available. I'm here too, goddammit, it wasn't a jab. Welcome to being old then, Demo. I guess? I don't know. This is just such a weird... This is such a weird argument, man. Because at the same... It's like Nexon is saying that the Korean court would have had jurisdiction over them on that verdict for that preliminary injunction at the end of July, this month. But at the same time, they're like, well, they could have just waited, which means that they would have honored it, and I don't believe that for a second. I think that Nexon still would have tried to fight this in U.S. court, even after Korean courts told them that they couldn't file the DMCA or couldn't pursue it anymore. Which also means that in that case, if the DMCA injunction happens, right, and they say stop bullying Ironmace, if the court gives them that, and Nexon goes, well, okay, I guess, like, they're going to just remove the DMCA? Bullshit. I don't believe that for a second. Because if that was going to happen, then they themselves would be waiting to see what Korean courts said. Unless, of course, there's that old two-word phrase that lawyers love to hear. Billable hours. Yeah, fucking get paid, boy. Here, because the defendants infringed domestically, blah, blah, blah. United States law applies to determine whether infringement has occurred, and if so, what remedies are available. Congress has granted plaintiffs a right to a venue in federal district court against foreign infringers who invoke and consent to DMCA and counter notification process. Accordingly, Congress' judgment may not be frustrated for reasons of convenience or expense, requiring court to deny defendant's motion. Okay.
This is funny. Even if the DMCA's venue provision at Iron Mace consents did not preclude a forum nonconvenience analysis, the court should deny defendant's motion for 2 independent reasons. First, Iron Mace's consent to jurisdiction renders this forum presumptively valid under Atlantic Marine. Second, even if the Atlantic Marine presumption did not apply, defendants cannot show existence of an adequate alternate forum or that the balance of public and private interest strongly favor dismissal. So what's interesting about this is that this Atlantic Marine case is being cited by both the prosecution and the defense at the same time, but for different reasons. The motion to dismiss leaned on Atlantic Marine really hard, and these guys are leaning on Atlantic Marine for the opposing stance. I don't even know. Is that common? Pretty sure it's just a fine for violating court orders like that in Korea, which Nexon could pay and continue their takedown. Iron Mace's argument is that U.S. courts should decline to try the case, not that U.S. courts don't have jurisdiction. That's right. Yeah. ChatGPT went hard. In Atlantic Marine, the Supreme Court held that where there's a bargain for forum selection clause, enforcing the bargain for selection protects the parties' legitimate expectations and further vital interests of the justice system and must be giving controlling weight in all but the most exceptional cases. So what's funny is that in the motion to dismiss, they say that Atlantic Marine doesn't apply because this isn't an exceptional case. Iron Mace made a bargain in which it availed itself of the benefits of submitting a counter notification. I love this. It availed itself of the benefits of submitting a DMCA counter notification in exchange for which it stated it consents to the jurisdiction of the Western District of Washington. Not for nothing, but they had 10 days to respond, otherwise it got permanently delisted. So it's not like they were going to have an answer from the Nexon court at the same time, right? That initial choice deserves deference, so this says. Indeed, the DMCA's consent to jurisdiction language is modeled on standard formulations used to create permissive forum selection clauses. Courts have repeatedly held that where a plaintiff sues in a jurisdiction designated in a permissive forum selection clause, a defendant seeking to transfer a case outside of the permitted forum must meet the Atlantic Marine standard to defeat the plaintiff's choice. So what they're saying is that this Atlantic Marine standard, it has to be an extenuating circumstance to be rewarded to have it moved outside of the forum selected by them under DMCA. Because what they're saying is that under DMCA, Iron Mace chose where it was going to be heard, more or less. And they're saying that Iron Mace would then have to be able to show that there's an extenuating circumstance as to why it would have to be moved from there. Congress gave alleged infringers an expeditious procedure to counteract the DMCA takedown notice, namely the privilege of submitting a DMCA counter notification. These motherfuckers. Which results in a service provider putting content back up unless the copyright owner promptly files a lawsuit seeking injunctive relief, which, again, they are strong-armed into having to do on all sides. In exchange for this privilege, Congress required foreign defendants to consent to jurisdiction in the judicial district where the service provider is found, ensuring copyright owners a federal forum to vindicate their United States copyrights. Congress therefore carefully balanced the interest of alleged foreign infringers and copyright holders. Defendants asked this court to disregard Congress's balancing and grant them all the benefits of the DMCA counter notification procedure without need to accept any of the burden. Okay, well, I would say that the burden on them is monetary, considering that their plans for releasing their game have been completely stunted by the DMCA claim made by Nexon to begin with, of which they had 10 business days to respond, and there's no way that Nexon would have found injunctive relief within the 10 business days in order for them to respond to the DMCA, and if they hadn't, the game would have been taken down forever. So, unless, of course, Nexon was ordered by the Korean court and honored it, to go back and remove the DMCA claim that would have stuck themselves. Which, fuck all that. There's no way. Because Atlantic Marine requires the court to hold defendants to the bargain they struck absent most extraordinary circumstances, and because defendants cannot show any such extraordinary circumstances, the court must deny their motion. Okay? Forum selection defendants rely on are inapplicable. Defendants attempt to skate past this deficiency. Atlantic Marine presumptively requires Nexon to litigate United States claims in pending proceedings initiated by Iron Mace and sue on court. Right. No one bargained for litigation and sue on court. Defendants' arguments relying on Atlantic Marine are frivolous. So The defendants are saying that, so Atlantic Marine, there were contracts signed in advance where they had already agreed on where the forum was going to be. They're saying that this doesn't count because the forum that they're arguing in Korea isn't the forum that they agreed upon in advance. So therefore, it doesn't count. But no party to the suit agreed to any such clause with any other party. The court therefore must reject the request. Even if defendants were seeking to litigate. So here's this piece from the beginning where I said that the argument relies on translating specific Korean words, and they have this guy Jason Park is a Korean linguist. He's a language expert that they pulled for this specific passage in here. Even if they were seeking to litigate in Seoul, their argument still fails because the clauses on which they rely don't cover disputes based on tortious conduct occurring after Choi and Park's employment. Now that, I think, is bullshit. Because in the motion to dismiss, they have actual language that actually goes directly against that. Let's see. Statement of facts. Here's the forum selection clause. A competent court of jurisdiction but be the Seoul Central District Court. Documents are drafted by Nexon. Yeah, so they're saying that the documents were drafted by Nexon and presented to Choi and Park for signature as is. You know, contracts of adhesion. It's not like they could argue like where the forum was going to be. I'm trying to find the section where there was a piece in one of the documents that just said like if it was going to be argued, it was even after termination. And it's right in their notice to dismiss. Trying to see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, okay, so it's in here somewhere. Employment agreement, course of their employment, can't disclose anything. Okay, so they're saying that they stole source code, audiovisual, and other materials. They seek to distribute through their newly formed company, ironmace. While they are completely false, these allegations are directly related to the acknowledgement about company IP and employment agreement containing the forum selection clause at issue, naming the alleged use of content that is similar or the same as the work-related inventions made at Nexon and the alleged disclosure of the company's trade secrets or any information acquired during the course of the defendant's employment. It doesn't talk about any type of time frame there at all. So what they're trying to say is that the defendants don't have a leg to stand on because it doesn't cover disputes based on conduct occurring after Choi and Park's employment. But they're not arguing over what they did after they were employees. They're arguing over what they did as employees and then brought with them into the company to then make the game, right? So it's one thing to say that they stole stuff, which is what they're saying happened with Choi, but then they initiated a lawsuit saying, well, the stuff that he stole, they're using on making our game right now. That doesn't, like, you can't just, like, throw out the employment contract because that's what they're relying on, and they did it themselves with their own initial complaint. They cited those contracts themselves. So I don't think this holds any water necessarily. But this piece is interesting here. The defendant's contrary argument relies on translating the Korean words into the English words related to this agreement. So the defense chose the phrase related to because related to is super broad, right? They're going to choose the most broad definition that they possibly can. But these Korean words could also fairly be translated as arising out of, regarding this agreement, in connection with this agreement, and other formulations. Defendants cherry-picked the related to translation because related to has been broadly construed in favor of in their favor in United States case law. But defendants offer no principled reason for selecting related to instead of arising out of or any other possible translation, and they offer no evidence that the Korean words have the specialized meaning of related to in United States case law. By contrast, Professor Suk explains how the Korean words would be understood by Korean speakers and demonstrates that they do not cover this dispute. So, interesting. We were just talking about how things have to get translated and certified, right? So, we're already arguing over words being translated and how the definitions of those translated words are going to relate back to United States case. This shit is going to be drawn out in court for literally fucking years. Literal years. Furthermore, the Korean Supreme Court has authoritatively construed contractual agreements specifying a Korean court as the exclusive jurisdiction for a dispute as reflecting only an agreement as to which court within Korea will hear a dispute, assuming the litigation is filed in Korea in the first place. Such clauses do not reflect an agreement that the litigation cannot be brought outside of Korea. Yeah, okay, so Korea doesn't say that you can't have it heard elsewhere. Okay, whatever. Because the parties are presumed to rely on this existing body of law in entering into agreements, the court must follow that law here. Well, it doesn't say that they must be heard. It just says that Korea doesn't care if it's heard or not. So that's kind of odd. Furthermore, to avail itself of the forum selection clauses in Choi and Park's employment-related agreements with Nexon, ironmace allegedly wrongful conduct must have some connection to the agreements themselves rather than ironmace simply having a connection to signatories on those agreements. Okay, so, all right, so here's an interesting thing here, too. The same thing being argued directly in opposition to each other. So what they're saying is that you can't rope ironmace into this because of ironmace being the company and the company being located in Korea. You can't rope ironmace into this. Ironmace's allegedly wrongful conduct must have some connection to the agreements rather than ironmace simply having a connection. And because ironmace or representatives of ironmace at the time were not signatories, at the time they were just employees of Nexon and ironmace didn't exist, then they can't rope that in. And they're citing this AMA Multimedia. Because ironmace was not even formed until after termination of Choi and Park's employment, ironmace infringed and misappropriation lacks the requisite relationship to the performance of the employment-related agreements themselves. Similarly, under Korean law, ironmace has no right to enforce the agreements because it's non-party. But Nexon named ironmace along with the two defendants in the DMCA case, which ropes them in automatically. And in the motion to dismiss, there is this WBX case that goes directly against that and shows that that exact scenario has already happened and it got included. So then it's like, all right, well, what does the judge go with? Because there's this WBX case. So, WBX, let's see. W Boxed Meat Distributors, WBX versus Parker. So the plaintiff WBX alleged that the defendants, Bill and Brian Parker, had unfairly competed with WBX by forming their own company called Double B, using WBX's confidential proprietary and trade secret information. Double B was started after the two got fired. As a condition of their employment, the Parkers entered into various agreements which prohibited them from using confidential information outside of the scope of their employment or from disclosing such information to other individuals or companies. The Parkers left WBX to start a competing business, Double B. Double B didn't exist while they were employees, allegedly taking confidential information and deleting files belonging to WBX in the process. Thereafter, WBX filed a lawsuit against the Parkers and Double B in the District of Washington. Relying on an Oregon forum selection clause that the party employment agreements to district court dismissed the case under the doctrine of forum nonconvenience, not only as to the Parkers, but also to Double B, which was not located in Oregon, relying on Manetti Supra. So, what they said is that their conduct, the two owners, were so closely related to that of the company that you couldn't disjoin them. They had to be one and the same. Even because they were using the information, which is what Nexon is alleging, they're using the information that was stolen to have created their company and make the game that they're making. That's what Nexon has been saying all along. So this is directly refuted by existing case law that is from the Ninth Circuit Court that was recently decided. So then the question is, all right, well, these guys, so to me, this looks super fucking weak because there's an exact case, exact same scenario has already happened where they found in favor of the motion to dismiss, not the opposition. So I don't think this is going to hold water at all. The defendants themselves took the position that the forum selection clauses do not cover the dispute. ironmace initiated Korean proceedings in Suwon Court and expressly replied, blah, blah, Suwon Court, yeah. Under the basic contract interpretation principles, defendants' reasonable practical construction of the forum selection clauses excluding the dispute will be adopted and enforced by the court. Okay. Even if the position the defendants are currently taking in this court were correct, it would mean that the defendants actively misled the Suwon Court when taking the opposite position there, giving defendants the unfair advantage of litigating in the preferred forum. Because this court must protect itself from perversion of judicial machinery through parties' attempt to take advantage of both sides of a factual issue, the court should have stopped defendants from asserting an inconsistent position here. So, I don't think that, again, I think that this is them really twisting it up a little bit. Because the way it looks to me is that ironmace was trying to injunct Nexon from continuing to bully them in United States court by using Korean court to do so. Like, they started bullying us, please tell them to stop. It wasn't that ironmace was trying to say that Nexon was infringing on their copyright claims or any of that other shit, or it had anything to do with their source code or any of those other things. It was literally just them trying to get the court to tell Nexon to stop pushing the way that they were pushing. Nexon was the one that said that they stole or got stolen from, and it was Nexon's agreement to enforce. It wasn't the defendant's agreement to enforce. And the defendant trying to invoke Nexon's own paperwork against them, I don't think would have really worked out for them anyway. But like, I'm not an attorney and I'm not in Korean court, so I don't know. It's just weird. It's basically saying that they can sue ironmace without the contractual agreements because the agreements were with their employees, not the new company. Right, that's true, but it's already been shown in U.S. court through this exact case that that isn't true because it's already happened. Using the exact same scenario. Why aren't you a Korean lawyer? I'm out. While ironmace's consent to this jurisdiction means the court must deny defendant's motion without engaging in traditional forum nonconvenience, it also fails under traditional analysis. All right. They're saying that the doctrine is an exceptional tool to be employed sparingly. To grant dismissal, a district court must decide that the defendants have made a clear showing of facts which establish such oppression and vexation of a defendant as to be out of proportion to plaintiff's convenience, which may be shown to be slight or non-existent. Okay. A defendant seeking forum nonconvenience must show the existence of an adequate alternative forum. Okay, so now what they're going to do is they're going to go into this whole thing from the statement with from this dude Park or from is it Park? Is it this guy? Yeah, from Minjung Park. They're going to go into them saying that the Korean court is not adequate because they don't look at and can't make people give up information as much as the United States court would be able to do. The defendant must show it's amenable to service a process in a forum. Defendants seek to enforce a forum selection clause for Seoul courts, but have only submitted evidence they are amenable in service in Suwon. Because defendants failed to submit evidence that they are amenable to service in the forum selected by the contracts on which they rely, the court has to deny. Okay. So they're saying that the contract shouldn't be honored because it's in a different court. But they're already arguing it in Suwon court. Like, they're fighting over it right now in Suwon court. And it's further ahead than the United States case. So I don't know if that's gonna matter. But it might. I don't know. Applying these standards, courts have held that if alternative forum procedural rules effectively block a plaintiff from establishing its claim, the alternative forum is inadequate. And now what they're going to say is that it's not adequate because they don't have all the information. In Beijing, for example, the Chinese rules of evidence required the plaintiff to present evidence from a Chinese notary who personally witnessed infringement, something which was impossible to obtain because infringement had already ceased. Thus, while the court accepted that China has copyright and trademark laws equal to that of the United States, upon closer inspection of the evidentiary requirements, China as an adequate forum was merely a mirage. So they're saying that the adequacy of Korea as an alternative forum likewise is a mirage, because Nexon alleges ironmace infringed their source code, while ironmace's primary defense is that it independently created its corresponding source code. Proving these claims requires the fact finder to compare Nexon and ironmace's source code side by side. Nexon cannot do this in Korea because ironmace has refused to produce its source code. Well, ironmace refused to produce its source code because you didn't want to meet the deal, but okay. And you also didn't give yours up either. But indeed, ironmace has stated it will not produce its source code unless Nexon agrees to withdraw the DMCA notice. That is, unless Nexon agrees to concede ironmace's claims against Nexon in the sue on preliminary injunction proceedings. Notwithstanding ironmace's obvious gamesmanship, the court in Korea is powerless to compel ironmace to produce the central evidence in this case. Forcing Nexon to concede ironmace's Korean claims against Nexon in order for Nexon to have a chance to establish its counterclaims against ironmace goes beyond mere unfairness and into the realm of Kafkaesque procedure. Kafkaesque. Wow. Pulling out Kafka. No shit. Defendant's brief seeks to elide this inadequacy by claiming a Korean panel of judges will evaluate ironmace's source code, but defendant's declarations do not support this claim, and defendants in fact have not provided any court ironmace's source code. Pulled in Kafka. So, for those of you that are just getting here, the argument is that the source code that was supposed to be provided to an independent third party, that's what ironmace wanted, Nexon wanted them to share with Nexon. And in exchange, Nexon said that they would give ironmace all of its P3 stuff. Ironmace said, no, remove the DMCA claim, and we'll see the rest of this out in court. And Nexon said, no, we're not going to do that. So ironmace said, okay, well, we're not going to give you our source code then. And instead, my belief is that ironmace has always said independent third party. They don't want to give that information to Nexon because of what Nexon could potentially be doing with it. And I think that that's fair. Why would you want to hand another company all of your shit? If they both agreed to an independent third party, I think that ironmace would be fine with it. But that hasn't ever been put on the table. And there isn't anything in here that says or is believed that Nexon wouldn't have gotten their hands on that stuff. And I think that it harms ironmace for them to give that up and still not have a marketable product. And it isn't in their best interest anyway. Like, they could potentially get a preliminary injunction awarded to them against Nexon to say remove the DMCA claim, and Nexon, maybe they honor it, maybe they don't. But I feel like this is a lot of gaming from both sides. Like, ironmace is protecting its interests. I don't think Nexon would necessarily abide by the ruling and remove the DMCA claim no matter what. If they were going to, they probably wouldn't be fighting this as hard as they are in U.S. court. Defendant's brief seeks to elide this inadequacy by claiming a Korean panel of judges will evaluate the source code. Right. Okay. The case ironmace cites finding Korea an adequate alternate form are readily distinguishable because none of them involve a defendant who has had exclusive control of a central evidence in the case by who brazenly refused to produce it. Ironmace wants this case in Korea because it is an inadequate forum. Korea permits ironmace to contend it used original source code to independently develop Dark and Darker while simultaneously permitting it to withhold the evidence that would refute its contention. Because a court may not dismiss a claim in favor of an inadequate forum, the court must deny defendant's motion. So that is the other big piece. And that, I mean, there is a lot of truth in this. I think that the motivations are bullshit. But it is true that they can't be compelled. So if they can't be made, along with witness testimony and statements and all this other stuff, if they can't be made to produce this in Korean court, the judge might end up ruling on the side of Nexon and saying the U.S. court case continues for that reason alone.
Right. And the court would have to make them both do it. Right. And it could be like, and it also sounds like Nexon is amenable to the idea, right? Nexon's going like, yeah, we'll give you all of our stuff. You just give us all of your stuff. Ironmace is just looking at this and saying, well, we don't want to give you our stuff. We want an independent third party to look at everybody's stuff. So why don't we both go to an independent third party? And I'm guessing that Nexon is kind of going like, we're going to use this conveniently and be like, nah, we don't really want a third party. Like, we want to look at it ourselves. And you can look at our stuff yourself if you want. But we want to look at your stuff ourselves. And I don't like that. Like, it's convenient, right? We keep talking about convenience. Even when an adequate alternative forum exists, a forum non-convenience dismissal is inappropriate unless the private interest and the public interest factor strongly favor trial in a foreign country. Wouldn't a court-ordered confidential third-party analysis of source code reveal the evidence and solve this? Yes, it would. But we're not there yet in U.S. court, right? And I feel like there's going to be a meeting later on this month. I think it's like the 26th of July in the United States. There's going to be a meeting later on in July about this to talk about like timeline and discovery and, you know, all this other stuff with the judge. Like, they're going to have a conference about this stuff. To me, it looks like all they would have to do is have a third party have the judge order that a third party evaluate the source code of both companies. Pow. And see what happens. Which is what Ironmace has been stating that it would be fine with doing anyway. So I don't understand why they keep tiptoeing around the issue. And I think it has to do with Ironmace showing like earlier builds of the game versus later ones. And them just being like, well, we'll give you the source code of the latest build, no problem. But Nexon isn't satisfied with that. Nexon wants it from the beginning. Right? Because maybe Nexon could find something in the earliest iterations of the game where the code looks the same in certain lines or something or similar. Versus now where it's considerably, like maybe it's more different now. I don't know. Well, Ironmace's consent to jurisdiction in this district means the private interest factors automatically weigh in favor of a police-selected forum, even if the court did weigh them, the favors factor litigating in this district. Residents of the parties and witnesses. The forum's convenience. Okay, so now they're going to say that the parties and witnesses, the residents of them, they're going to talk about the companies like AWS and Valve, not so much people. The forum's convenience to litigants, so the people that are arguing this, including the attorneys. Physical evidence and other sources of proof. Okay. Korea is far less favorable as a forum than the United States to resolve this dispute because a court can't compel defendants to produce source code and development documentation. Defendants have refused to produce it, and Nexon is unable to compel any of the defendants. In contrast to Korea, where defendants need only provide evidence that support their contentions, in the United States, defendants and their employees, including those that stole P3 materials shortly before leaving Nexon, are subject to the full panoply of discovery procedures under the federal rules that will disprove their assertions. Defendants argue that Korea is more favorable because, while Korean courts can compel testimony of third parties located in Korea for a Korean case, Korea has issued a treaty reservation stating it will not honor a subpoena for testimony in aid of United States litigation. So, Korea has said that they won't honor subpoenas for testimony to the United States. But what they're trying to say, but what this is going to say is that in the real world, that really wouldn't matter. The only Korean witnesses defendants specifically identify are party employees subjected to full discovery without need of assistance from Korean court. Defendants are incorrect. Korean court wouldn't honor a subpoena. Korea's reservation applies to discovery of documents, not testimony. Conclusions and recommendations adopted by the special committee, and then they're citing the laws. Because defendants failed to identify any third-party witness in Korea on whose testimony they'd rely, the court would abuse its discretion in weighing this factor in defendants' favor. So they don't have any person that would be testifying that they've named in their dismissal request. But that doesn't mean that the discovery wouldn't yield additional people. I mean, that's kind of the point of the evidentiary stuff. The third-party witness with information relevant to this case are likely to be domestic witnesses like Valve and Amazon, with likely to be... like, I feel like this is, like, really reaching. Like, well, you know, as far as we can tell, it's only going to be Valve and Amazon anyway. They don't really have anybody else that they would possibly rely on, you know, from the point of the plaintiff anyway. Like, the defense just doesn't have anything. Like, how would they know? No one's done any discovery yet. With information concerning defendants' infringement and misappropriation in the United States, while this court can compel testimony from witnesses across the United States, Korea allows no equivalent deposition procedure.
Defendant's reliance on the need to translate some documents and testimony from Korean into English is also misplaced. Both Nexon's and ironmace's source code are written in English, and the textual elements of the parties' video games are in English. Because Nexon's source code and the audiovisual aspects of the game, along with defendant's corresponding copied material, constitute the intellectual property and accused material at issue in the dispute, like they're saying that the core material is all in English. Litigating in Korea requires translation of the central evidence in the case from English to Korean, where some evidence will be in English and some will be in Korean. These conflicting considerations largely cancel each other out. Moreover, courts in the United States work around such language limitations every day with minimal inconvenience to the court and parties. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily true. You got 5,000+ pages worth of documentation that all have to be translated from Korean into English. That's believed, by everybody, I think, because the majority of that correspondence is going to be via like email and whatnot. But similarly, the location of some documents in Korea is not a significant impediment to the litigation in the United States. The location of documents is increasingly irrelevant in the age of electronic discovery, when thousands of pages of documents can easily be digitized and transported to any appropriate forum. I don't think it's so much about the digitizing of the documents as it is the certified translation of them, which is going to be thousands of man-hours. The court can compel the parties and domestic third parties to produce discovery as needed, and contrary to defendants' conclusory assertions, a Korean court will honor a targeted request for documents from this court. So according to Suk, who's another one of the legal experts that Nexon is relying on, he's saying that the Korean court would honor a targeted request for documents from the court, even though they can't be ordered to. On the other hand, Korea has no means to compel compliance with pretrial requests for disclosure of evidence. So the Korean court can't make people in pretrial stuff for civil matters give up. They can't make people give up stuff they don't want to give up. Whereas the United States court could. And that is a big thing. I mean, like, that's a big thing. Because if in the U.S. court, the judge were to just go, you show me yours and you show me yours. I want to see everybody's stuff. All right? Drop trout, give it all to me right now. I want to see it all. And it's ordered to be as such, they have to comply. Otherwise, they get found potentially in contempt, and then they get fined, or the case gets tossed, or whatever, from whoever doesn't want to show up with everything. TLDR Nexon winning? No, this doesn't mean anything. Insofar as Nexon winning or not, I think is not even on the table. There's nothing in here that would say that Nexon has an upper hand. It just means that Nexon is arguing. They have two strong points in this. I think it's only two strong points. They have two strong points in this to say that it should still be heard in the U.S. But at the same time, I feel like they kind of shoot themselves in the feet, because they're saying that ironmace should have just waited to hear whether or not the injunction was going to be granted in Korean court, instead of trying to pursue the DMCA stuff, which they kind of had to do because of the time limits. But there's also nothing in here that says that Nexon would be willing to concede to an injunction made by the Korean court if it got made. And I don't think they would either anyway. Because if the Korean court's like, you have to remove your DMCA claim, stop bullying these guys, and Nexon's like, all right, yeah, we understand, they're not going to do that. I don't even know if they can be compelled to do that. Because if that were the case, then Nexon would have not been pushing the DMCA case in the United States as hard as they would, and they'd be waiting to see what happened. No one in the case is winning, but there are losers, and that's us. Yeah, that's a good point. The physical location of witness is less important when testimony may be taken by deposition and presented to the court and at a summary judgment stage or trial. Defendants are required to appear live at a trial. Defendants have failed to present any financial info. Oh, yeah. So they could testify via live video conference. To the extent defendants are required to appear live at a trial, defendants have failed to present any financial information or other evidence suggesting such travel is oppressively outside of their means. You mean other than that, one of the named defendants, meaning Choi, has had liens placed against his house, his bank accounts, and his vehicles? Sure. Yeah, I'm sure he's got just tons of money laying around where he could fly back and forth to the U.S. to defend himself. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Furthermore, given that the defendants reached into this district to create contacts with Valve and Amazon to facilitate infringement and misappropriation in the United States, defendants could reasonably expect to answer for their conduct here. It would be too convenient for the defendant to reap the benefits of engaging in at least some business in California over a period of years, only to plead inconvenience when sued in California court. So, again, though, they're citing that defendant reaping benefits of engaging at least in some business in California. Now, like, I don't know how they want to define what business is, but to me, that is like an exchange of assets of value. Like, if I am conducting business, it's like I'm going to offer up my cell phone in exchange for goods and or services or property, right? But they haven't done any of that. Like, all they've done is advertise the potential of a video game to exist that would have been on Steam when it eventually got to the point where it would go on sale. There hasn't been any business conducted, at least not in my mind. I don't know how they would define what business being conducted is if they're going to cite this case. But, like, really all they've done is advertise a game, and it cost them over time. Like, it's only been an expense to them, right? If anything, Iron Mace has been providing charity because they haven't taken in a penny from anybody that had played that game at all. Finally, defendants have identified no issues in enforcing a United States judgment in Korea, and there are none. Because Nexon selected this forum for its significant advantages in access to proof and practicalities in presenting its case rather than to oppress or vex defendants, defendants cannot establish the private interest factors strongly favoring dismissal. So that might be the thing. That could be the thing. The DMCA provision. So there's two pieces. There's them invoking DMCA when they responded, saying that they concede to the jurisdiction of the court in the United States. And there's also this piece about Korean courts being weaker than United States courts because of what can be ordered. An expense is part of a business. An expense is part of my personal checkbook. That doesn't mean that my personal checkbook is part of my business either, though. Right? I can conduct business with another business as a person. And a business could conduct business with another business by transacting, like, property. Like, that's what I look at. Like, it's an exchange of property. Like, that's quote unquote doing business, right? I don't know what the definition of doing business is if it's only one way. Like, it's front loading expenses. You could be front loading your expenses in order to reap the reward later. But I don't know if that is considered business having been conducted. If it's just an expense. I mean, like, I guess you could say that Valve conducted business with Iron Mace because Valve was taking in cash. Because Iron Mace... Well, Valve wasn't even making any money on it either. Because Valve makes money on percentages of sales. Right? It's an expense to Valve too. So really, AWS was the only person that was making any money from the server usage. Right? Is a one-way contract that is only an expense to a business considered conducting business? I don't know. They weren't conducting business with any of us, and they haven't made any money as a result. It looked like marketing expense to me, but I don't know if that's the same as conducting business or not. I don't know. Did they not make money from the limited box set they sold? I don't know. It hasn't been made yet. I don't think any of the proceeds get distributed until after the box set is distributed. I don't know. Like, is the business they're considering is the business that they're saying that Iron Mace did based on, like, player statistics? They took money from the Tavern Cup thing they did using DAT IP. Well, right. I assume that there was money involved in that. But again, in that case, like, I don't know when then, like, it could be promissory though, right? Like, it could be based on, like, production of product and, like, that getting distributed, and then there's, like, a percentage of the proceeds, and you know what I don't know. I don't know how that works. I just got here, so I don't want a full recap. Good or bad for Iron Mace? Yes.
When analyzing the public interest factors, the court considers local interest in the lawsuit, the court's familiarity with governing law, the burden on local courts and juries, congestion in the court. Okay, so then there's one other piece here. Actually, there's a third piece here. Courts ask only if there is an identifiable local interest in the controversy, not whether another forum also has an interest. To retain jurisdiction, the court need not hold that Washington is the principal locus of the case or that Washington has more of an interest than any other jurisdiction. It just needs an interest. Thus, for example, a Vietnamese defendant entered into relationships with Apple and Google in California to place an app in their app stores that facilitated infringement of music. Although defendant's primary audience was in Vietnam, the defendant did not geo-block United States users, resulting in more than 320,000 downloads of its app in the United States. Rejecting the defendant's argument that Vietnam was a more convenient forum because it was the location of the majority of witnesses and evidence, the Ninth Circuit held copyright cases concerning alleged unlawful activities purposefully directed toward the United States are more amenable to suit in the United States. So they're saying that because the business is being done on Steam, or would be done on Steam, that it should be heard in the U.S. because of Steam, basically. The defendant's targeting of the United States is more extreme than the targeting of the Lang defendant. Defendants have geo-blocked Korean users for one playtest, which had a pittance comparatively to that of the best playtest, which saw 10% of its users being Korean, but whatever. While engaging in extensive English language marketing toward the United States, defendants' relentless targeting of the United States market has resulted in hundreds of thousands of gamers playing Dark and Darker in the United States, representing by far defendants' largest market. So wait, you're saying it's more extreme, but you just said this was hundreds of thousands of downloads. So which one is it? Is it more extreme or is it hundreds of thousands? I think it's as extreme, potentially. Defendants accomplished their extensive infringement and misappropriation in the United States by entering into contracts with Valve and Amazon to facilitate users accessing the game. Because defendants purposefully directed their activities to this country, Nexon claims are more amenable to suit in the United States than in Korea. I mean, it's possible. The largest market is the United States. There's no denying that at all. Even at the most diverse it ever was, it was still 31%. Ignoring Lang, Van, and minimizing their targeting of the United States, defendants claim there is no local interest in having this matter resolved in Washington. But the United States and Washington in particular is a hub of intellectual property-based industries. Dude, they're just horking on this thing right now. We love Washington. Has a strong interest in enforcing these. While Nexon is a Korean corporation, Nexon Group entities employ hundreds of people in the United States and conduct substantial business within the United States, giving Nexon a material stake in the United States IP system. Furthermore, because defendant Park is a United States citizen, he was a United States citizen by birth. He hasn't been there in 15 years. The United States has a strong interest in ensuring its citizens respect its laws within its borders. Thus, Washington and United States jurors have a substantial interest in the enforcement of these rights. That one's reaching too. In cases where defendants rely, in which a Virginia resident bought a suit in New York over a warehouse fire in Virginia, in which Dutch citizens sued in California over a Singapore Airlines crash in Taiwan, have no bearing on these issues here. So they're saying that the Gulf Oil Corp versus Gilbert and Van Schneidel versus Boeing, they're saying that they have no bearing on the issues. Right, it wasn't filed by Nexon USA. It was filed by Nexon Korea Corporation. That's right. Nor is the defendant's connection to Valve and therefore the United States and this district incredibly attenuated to this case as defendants contend. Defendants targeted the United States for mass-scale infringement and misappropriation, and there was nothing fortuitous about defendants reaching out to a United States service provider to facilitate this infringement. Defendants targeted United States for mass-scale infringement, alleged mass-scale infringement per your client, and alleged misappropriation per your client, and there was nothing fortuitous about defendants reaching out to a United States service provider to facilitate this infringement. Well, it's because Steam is the marketplace, like the marketplace. They damn near have a monopoly on game distribution. There is no company that does it better. If there were, and that company resided in North Korea, they would go there. It could be anywhere. If it's the largest marketable platform, that's where anyone would go. It just so happens that it resides in the United States. It has nothing to do with whether or not it's in the United States. It's just where that happens to be. While defendants ask the court to treat this contact as largely irrelevant, Congress disagreed with that assessment by making the location of an online service provider the presumptive jurisdiction to litigate a claim against foreign defendant who seeks a DMCA counter notification. I mean, they could have gone to Epic Game Store too, but it doesn't have that big of a reach, not anywhere close to Steam's reach. And Steam is an international platform. So like, while 31% of the player base was from the United States, yes, that's absolutely true, and it was the largest single pie wedge. The SEA made up another almost 30% by themselves. And then, you know, obviously the other 30+% is from everywhere else on the globe, majority of which is in the EU. So, I don't know, man. Furthermore, defendants' reliance on the need to avoid duplication with Korean proceedings is unavailing. Form nonconvenience does not turn on the existence of any pending parallel litigation. Okay, so they're saying that just because there's parallel litigation doesn't mean anything. And whereas here the plaintiff alleges specific facts concerning events of infringement that occurred on U.S. soil, the factor favors denial of the motion. Moreover, granting defendant's motion does not solve the problem of duplication. If this court construes the forum selection clauses to require Nexon to litigate its United States claims in Seoul Central District Court, the court's decision would result in Nexon filing litigation in Seoul that will proceed in parallel with litigation in Suwon Court, in which the parties are currently litigating their Korean law claims. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. I mean, they're saying, like, so what they're trying to make it sound like they're going to be forced to file in Seoul, and they're not at all. What they're saying, like, this almost sounds like threatening. Like, all right, well, if you throw it out, then we're just going to go to Seoul and file it there, and then those will be in parallel. So then what? Like, why does the United States courts give a flying fuck about whether or not you decide to have multiple lawsuits in multiple court locations in a different country? Like, why would I give a fuck about that? It's absurd to divide the litigation of Korean and United States claims between Suwon and Seoul courts when a United States district court has jurisdiction over all parties necessary to adjudicate Nexon's claims that defendants violated United States IP laws through their conduct targeting the United States. So, again, I don't think that's strong at all, because this just circles back to the whole thing about them saying, like, well, if ironmace didn't exercise their DMCA right, we wouldn't be here. Which could also be argued that if Nexon never made the claim in the first place, we also wouldn't be here. And there's Nexon saying that ironmace could have just waited to hear whether or not the Suwon court would have filed the injunction or ordered the injunction on behalf of ironmace to tell Nexon to take down the DMCA claim. Doesn't necessarily mean that Nexon would have honored it, and it doesn't mean that Nexon would have not filed the DMCA claim in the United States anyway, even though they're kind of saying that in their own opposition. It just seems like it's super circular. While this court has a policy of bringing cases to trial in approximately 1 year, litigation in Seoul court typically takes 1 to 2 years. Okay, another reason why it could just be heard in the existing court that you're already in, being that Suwon is already ahead of everyone. But thus, the court congestion factor does not weigh in favor of dismissal. So they're saying, like, if we file in Seoul, it's going to be 2 years before this case gets heard. In the United States, they're saying it's a year, by the way. So we still got a long fucking time, dude. Like, if they don't settle this before it actually hits a trial, we're never seeing this fucking game released, dude. I'm going to be, like, my middle child is going to be in high school before this game ends up seeing the light of day, if ever. These guys might as well just pack it up and go fucking make a new game. Like, change countries, move to fucking Russia, license the game to a Russian game dev, and just have them make the game instead. It'll still be out before Star Citizen. It'll still be out before Star Citizen and Ashes of Creation, though. So, I mean, there's that. Yeah, can't they just name it? We'll name it Gray and Grayer. They'll never know. They'll never know. Yeah. They could just name it, they could, I got an idea. What if we made a dungeon crawler, okay, that has slight BR aspects, but mainly extraction mechanics that never existed at a place like Nexon, okay? And we just call the game Fuck Nexon. The game. What do you... I think it has a good ring to it. What do you think?
Really good name. I think it's got a good ring to it. Yeah. We could just go, yeah, just fuck Nexon. Yeah. What do you think? I think it's got a, I think it's just a sharp name, right? Just right on the tip of the tongue there, you know, just rolls right off. You know, fuck, yeah, fuck Nexon. Sounds like a great name. Fuck Nexon. You know, good name, right? Yeah. Already being made. Well, now I guess I gotta go file copyright infringement. There you go. Somebody's stealing my idea. Wait, that's right. Ideas aren't copyrightable. Silly me. Because defendants engaged in a purposeful campaign of infringement and misappropriation targeted to the United States. I love this. Purposeful campaign of infringement and misappropriation targeted to the United States. The public interest strongly favors litigation in the United States and the Western District of Washington, the venue designated by Congress and consented to by ironmace to resolve the dispute. So, yeah. There's a lot, dude. This is like, it was like 250 pages worth of shit with all the supporting documentation and everything. There's a lot. Strong, pronounced. I love it. Yeah. What if we just named the game torch.uasset? Just, you know, we just all kickstart this thing around meow. You know? Awkward naming convention simulator the game. Or we could just name it DMCA this you fucks. Yeah, you know? Like, I couldn't see this actually happening. All right? I want to preface this in advance. I couldn't see this actually happening where like where the Iron Mace devs actually did this. But like, because I don't think that they're this shady. I really don't think that they're this shady. I think that they're actually pretty stand-up guys. From the interactions I've had with them, at no point was I under the impression that they were trying to like con people or be thieves or any of that. And I've had quite a few interactions with these guys, and I think that they're all decent people. And I also couldn't see, like, because these guys are all veteran game devs, right? Like, they're veteran game devs, and I couldn't see them justifiably like just ruining a 20 plus year long career between, you know, like a 20 plus year long career between SDF and a 20 plus long year career between Terry and all of the other senior devs that they pulled in to Iron Mace, and you know, because they got like 30 guys that are working in the studio. I couldn't see a reality where they would throw all of that shit away in exchange to pursue something like this, right? I just can't see it. Because they blackball themselves. It doesn't make any sense. Not saying that it could be. It could be. I just don't... Like, I would be surprised if it was that, right? That's all. But I wouldn't be surprised, necessarily. And I'm not saying that they would do this, because I think that they're decent people. But I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly, somehow, there was some GitHub repository that was conveniently made public that just happened to have all of the files from the last Dark and Darker playtest on it. You know? Wouldn't be surprised if things started to get weird. You know? If it just suddenly became public domain. They admit they were involved in predatory business practices. Yeah, right. And again, I don't think that they would. I think that they're too good of people to stoop. If that makes sense. I think they're too good of people to stoop to something like that shitty. And I think that being that they come across as honorable people, I feel as though that if there were a judgment against them, like they would begrudgingly honor it and just do whatever they were ordered to do. Now they're going to fight tooth and nail in the meantime. But this doesn't show like somebody's going to be in a better position or worse or whatever. But there are a few pieces in here that are a bit wild. Between the two other guys that they say that they found that stole stuff, and like right before they quit, to the argument over how the Korean court can't compel Ironmace to share their source code any more than they can compel Nexon to share its source code. And Nexon tries to paint itself in like this, this light where they were going to be forthcoming as long as the other guys were. And then said, well, the other guys didn't want to. So like, we're not going to drop our DMCA claim, and that's what they wanted us to do, and we're not going to do that. So, like, it doesn't make any sense for us to give up our information, which it doesn't. It doesn't. And I don't want to say that, like, they're well within their rights to do so, and so is Ironmace in Korean court, it seems. But Ironmace has always said that they wanted an independent third party to review the code. And that has already been established by other cases. Like, the Myth of Empires case versus Snail Games, that has gone to where that happened. An independent third party reviewed it and found that Myth of Empires stole source code from Arc in order to be able to make their game. So, like, that bad. And it's still going through court proceedings right now. That's in U.S. court, though. So I don't know because of another Valve DMCA takedown request. So if this proceeds, that's what I would want to see happen. I just want a judge to sit in front of him and go, what the fuck are we arguing about? Okay, so we're arguing about, like, source code and we're arguing about assets. Okay, so you take out your source code and assets, and you take out your source code and assets, and both of y'all are going to show it to that guy, and that guy is going to tell you whether or not you stole from each other. All right? Cool. See you guys in 2 months. And that's it. Just do that. And then you can make your injunctions or whatever against whoever, if ever, whenever, and we can just be done with it. I don't understand what the hell we're arguing about. Does that come down to the cost of an expert witness third party? I mean, is it really that easy? Yeah, it is. Because there's a case that is almost exactly like this regarding source code that would be exactly that. Yeah, it is that easy. Why not? Because that's what the thing... See, this is the thing. Nexon has no proof other than circumstances that source code from their game was stolen. All they have is circumstantial stuff because an employee left with files and deleted them. So he says Nexon has no proof that he didn't do anything else with them later, right? And their court case against him is only pertaining to that he stole them and then was fired as a result, and the court gave a preliminary injunction and put liens on his shit. But the prosecutor in Korea, by its own accord, by declarations made by the plaintiff in this opposition, he hasn't been brought up on charges by the prosecutor. It's been a long time, and the prosecutor hasn't charged him with anything. And there's no proof that any of that stuff was brought into Ironmace by anyone. The only way to figure out whether that actually happened is for them to share game files and to show the source code and to have the people from P3 compare that with a third party, have those compared against each other to see if there's code line by line that matches. That's it. If they can find it, then okay. In the Myth of Empires case, there were like hundreds and hundreds of lines of code that were the same, like carbon copy the same. Right, and IM has been saying for a long time that they just want an independent third-party review. And to my knowledge, Nexon has not agreed to an independent third party. Nexon has only agreed to sharing. Like, you give us your stuff, we'll give you our stuff. And I don't like that. And if I was Ironmace, I wouldn't like that, and I wouldn't want to agree to that either. Why would I give my stuff to the enemy? right? It's one thing if I'm going into trial and I'm compelled to, and I have to give all of my evidentiary findings to the other party, because in United States cases, that's what you have to do. Part of discovery is you have to show them yours, they show you theirs. Right? Right. And like, that's what I mean. Like, there has to be a third-party auditing expert that understands really well. And I'm sure there have been, laundry lists. There's probably laundry lists of court-appointed experts that are paid to be an expert for court to review this kind of shit, right? There are court-appointed experts that are on a list where the judge will just pick one from the list and they will audit it, or a team of people will audit it and see what they have, right? And that's what they need to do. They need a disinterested third party to review the shit and come back and go like, well, all of these things are the same or not. And yeah, there's going to be conventions that are the same, right? Like certain things, but what you would want to look at in this case would be like let's say the time for a two-handed axe swing from a barbarian is done over a certain number of milliseconds, and the angle of attack is at a specific angle down to a decimal point, right? The tracer follows a specific path, or the arms are elongated away from the body at a very specific distance, right? You would want to look at the code for those types of things as if you would look at like a birthmark on a person as an identifying characteristic of a video game, right? And see if those two things are exactly the same. Because if there's things in there that are like that are exactly the same, then it's really hard. Like, you could be the person that was the designer for the barbarian and for that specific axe swing, right? But at some point, the similarity count gets to be so high that there's no way that they could have made what they made without, like, copying somebody else's homework. You know what I'm saying? So it would be one thing to say, like, there's one or two, like, similar aspects, but if there's, like, 50 or 100 in the code, then okay. Like, maybe they got something. But, like, you know what I mean? And then it's not a matter of arguing over whether or not there was code taken, right? Then it's arguing over a matter of how much of that is integral to the game. And then if Nexon has a claim on it, how much of a claim does Nexon actually have on the game if the core function of the games differ? Because in Project P3, that was always a BR game. Battle Royale. It's a dungeon crawler, but it's a BR game. That was Nexon's game. Ironmace's game is an extraction game. It's got a BR mechanic, but it's like BR light. Extraction is the primary focus of that game. And there was no extraction mechanic in Project P3. So they're already different. And it just now, so then you start talking about derivative works from the original one and how much of a claim does Nexon have on it. See what I'm saying? Kind of like if you use a sample of somebody else's music in a song that you create, they get a portion of that royalty, but they don't get the whole royalty because there's a huge other section of the song that was independently arranged, right? Like Nexon could say that they have claim to certain aspects of Dark and Darker, or the court could agree that they have claim to certain aspects of Dark and Darker, but they couldn't claim anything having to do with like the Bard. They couldn't claim to have anything to do with like the Warlock, for instance, right? Because functionally those characters never existed in Project P3, right? So, it's going to be interesting to see like where this goes, but it's going to be a fucking while, and these guys are going to be arguing this forever, dude. Forever. Percentage difference you need in the source code. For example, my wife is a buyer for Dillard's, and their private labels get ripped off all the time by cheaper manufacturers, but if those rip-offs products are 10% different, they have no case. Right. So that's it. So then it becomes an argument of precedent over how much different is something allowed to be before it's considered different. You know? That's fine, but we will still get EA while the court case is going. You understand that, right? Well, maybe. We don't know if we will or not. See, because here's the thing. By the end of this month, the Korean court is going to make a decision, at least preliminarily, as to whether or not they're going to award an injunction either against Nexon or against ironmace, somewhere by the end of July, in Korean court. If they order Nexon to give up the DMCA thing, I don't know if Nexon's going to abide it at all, by the way, but if they order Nexon to give up the DMCA thing, then maybe ironmace ends up having a feather in its cap, and they try to bring that into an argument in the United States if the United States court keeps going. If the United States court grants the motion to dismiss, that means the DMCA no longer applies, because the DMCA rules, this motion to dismiss would kick it off to the Korean court. DMCA gets tossed. So then it would be relisted on Steam. Now, I don't know how they handle pending appeals or any of that, and I'm assuming that Nexon would appeal in court and all this other shit. Of course, they're going to go to the appellate court. They would probably declare that they're going to appeal, like, instantly. So I don't know how Steam handles that if it's going to appeal, but the original lawsuit is gone if it gets dismissed, which means that DMCA doesn't apply anymore unless the appeal succeeds and it goes back to the opportunity for them to retry it. They probably already have an appeal written up. Yeah. They won't drop the DMCA at all. Well, if this court case gets tossed, the DMCA doesn't apply anymore. They would have to refile a new DMCA complaint, and that's only after the Court of Appeal warranted that they would be allowed to reopen it. Right? If it gets dismissed, there is no DMCA claim anymore. It's not whether or not they can drop it. If the Korean court orders them to drop it, I don't know if they have to abide it even. I have no idea how that works. If it's a fine, if they don't, if they, you know, I have no idea. But by the end of the month, we'll know whether or not Korea sides with ironmace or not. And I think that that's going to end up saying a lot, preliminarily speaking. I think that's going to end up saying a lot. If the court sides against ironmace and injuncts them and tells them that they can no longer conduct business on the game because it's presumed that they're in violation of Nexon, ironmace is probably fucked. They're probably fucked. Because there will be no early access. So it kind of hinges on that. I don't see any sense in them releasing any type of early access on any platform before that ends up coming down. So yeah, the next 3 weeks they're going to be like shitting glass. I would be. Pretty sure if the case got thrown out, they wouldn't have new grounds to make another case against them. They need new evidence. Right, which is why I say if they go to the Court of Appeal and the appeal overturns the judgment on the dismissal, they would then be able to reopen the DMCA claim. But yeah, what they're seeking is the motion to dismiss with prejudice and have the judge order them not to file another claim until they are, unless they have, significant compelling evidence, new shit, whatever. Yeah. So, I don't know how it's going to go, but it seems like it kind of hinges on whatever the Korean court says by the end of this month. So we got a few more weeks, and we'll see what they say, I guess. Kind of crazy though. There are a couple of strong points in here though, man. I'm not going to say there aren't. There's a lot of fluff, but they have a couple of strong points. I mean, not being able to compel them to have to give up source code and game files and all that stuff from either party for a preliminary injunction hearing is kind of wild. Because that's like something that you figure like why wouldn't you just do that? But again, I think this is ironmace saying that they wanted to give it to an independent third party instead of giving it to Nexon. And Nexon didn't want to play ball with that. So settlement's the most likely outcome. I think that Nexon is going to wait to hear. I think Nexon is going to wait to hear whether or not ironmace gets their way in court by the end of this month. If ironmace is given an injunction, because Nexon filed counter, right? If ironmace is given an injunction, I could see ironmace trying to figure out a settlement so that they could continue working on their game. Because, like, and if Nexon was smart in business practice, they would just, like, figure something out so that, like, a royalty of some kind or a percentage of proceeds or whatever was paid to Nexon, because they're going to make more money off of this game than they would have made themselves having Nexon or even whatever the fuck the subsidiary name was attached to it. Because they're operating outside of corporate interest right now, and it's not, it isn't slowed. So it's going to depend on, like, what the Korean court says, I think. U.S. is the end of this month. The Korean court is by end of August. U.S. court is by end of August. U.S. court is by end of August for pre-trial stuff and meetings and talking about discovery. The Korean court went on a 1-month recess at the beginning of, or at the tail end of June. So it's like July 26th or something. Hiring a third party to make them split that shit and somebody give us dad. Why other party would refuse a third party review? I don't think Iron Mace has refused a third party review. Iron Mace, as far as I'm aware, has been completely okay with a third party review. It feels like Nexon is kind of dragging its feet because Nexon wants Iron Mace to give them their source stuff, and Nexon said in exchange they would give Iron Mace their source stuff. So, and Iron Mace doesn't want to do that. They want to give it to a third party. So I don't know. I would just say if it continues in U.S. court, if I were the judge, I would just order that the both of them give up the goose and both of them give their source code to a third party, have the third party audit it, and come back and tell the court what's in it and whether or not it's the same. That's it. That's what I would do. And then that third party, that's right. And then that third party can release Dark and Darker for us. Problem solved. Problem solved. Easy, dude. Easy claps. When they did it for the Myth of Empires case, it took 2 months. The Myth of Empires case took 2 months. Now, in the meantime, now let's say it through the Korean court sides with Iron Mace and they say, Nexon, stop fucking around. That might give Iron Mace a little bit of a push to go to early access. Assuming, and I would assume that if the injunction against Nexon happens, that the attorneys for Iron Mace would be all over that shit and would instantly file something in U.S. court that would say, like, Korean court just said they had to drop the DMCA claim. Please enforce that. And I don't know if there's precedent or statute or anything there. I'm assuming that it would be like Atlantic Marine or something that would have them recognize the verdict. Something in there maybe. But yeah, it would be cool. It would be cool to see. Wouldn't that be the smart thing to do, is to go to EA if possible? Potentially. What ends up happening in that case, though, is that, like, let's say there's they go to EA and then the court comes back and says, gives them an injunction, says they can't conduct business, continue working on the game anymore, right? If they get an injunction that says you have to stop, cease and desist. If they get an injunction that says you have to stop, that means that they can't service the game that they just put up on Steam for early access. It also might mean that there's monetary penalties as a result, because the judge could look at it like, oh, you were just trying to rush this out and ahead of this because you knew that this was coming, and you're continuing to further fuck over these guys that have merit. So they could end up being penalized by the court as a result of doing that. So I don't know. Or it could just be like the court's like, all right, well, you know, that's how you're going to afford your legal defense. I guess it's fine. But they're going to keep the meter running regardless, right? Right now, there's no money exchanging hands, right? Like, Iron Mace hasn't made any money at all. They're on the hook for legal fees, potentially. But in the case of Iron Mace, like, what they're looking at now is if they go to early access, now the meter starts running. Because then you're talking about damages from money earned as a result of stolen IP, if the IP was stolen. Right now, there isn't any money exchanging hands, so they're not on the hook for any cash. It's just that they can't make any money from it now. Yeah, Nexon could be penalized for acting predatory, because if it's shown that they knew that the case was bullshit, like let's say that the script is entirely flipped and Nexon filed this just because they're butt mad about these guys leaving, right? If they know that the case is frivolous, but they pursue it anyway, and it's shown in the evidence that the case was bullshit, and Nexon knew it, then you could absolutely have damages hit. Yeah. And I think that's what ironmace tried to establish when they counterclaimed, or when they filed the putback request, is they were trying to show that there's some amount of hardship as a result of this. It slowed all the progress down. You know, it stifled interest in the game. Like, less people want to play it because they thought ironmace was right, or they thought ironmace was wrong. They thought Nexon was right. So there could absolutely be arguments made there. Whether or not they could quantify that is, I don't know. Could they receive crowdfunded? Yeah, I mean, like, they could if they wanted to. They could go to like a GoFundMe or something, but they haven't done that yet. And which is interesting because they're not acting as though they need it. So it's possible that they secured some outside funding. They might have like a third-party investor that threw money at them to help them with their court case, which would be good, right? It's just a matter of if they start running low, I'd assume that they would go to like the GoFundMe route and have people, and because they'd raise $500,000 in a week. You know, like, there's a lot of people that are passionate about the game. They'd throw $5 to them, no problem.